Chapter 50-36. Secretary Li thought to herself, when men are heartless, they don't give women any chance to live. But this was also good. Su Mu would be free in the future. Secretary Li went to handle it. Soon, she was done and gave Yi Xiangnan 2 little green books. Yi Xiangnan didn't want to give it to Su Mu. Anyway, in her heart, what she took was real. In fact, there was no difference whether he gave it or not. At night, he asked Qin Xian out for a drink. Recently, he and Qin Xian had been a little close. There was no other reason. It was because Bai Anan was pregnant. It was Qin Xian's child. The two of them were also very quarreling. They had obviously taken the medicine, but they didn't know that Bai Anan had bought fake medicine. Now, the child had grown up in her belly. If they didn't want to abort it, they could only get married. Because of this, Yi Xiangnan felt that Qin Xian knew him very well. They were all careless. However, Qin Xian was much happier than him. At least, Bai Anan was a great beauty and a strong woman. But she was also very tolerant. Only she could tolerate Qin Xian. Su Mu didn't have many advantages. She had a lot of shortcomings. He didn't know where she got her sense of superiority and confidence. When he heard his mother say that Su Mu did a good job in the newspaper office, he found it funny. No matter how good she was, how much money did she make a year? She didn't have a good job as Mrs. Yi. Instead, she went out to drink with people every 2 or 3 days. He didn't know whether she was doing news or socializing. He heard all this from Secretary Li. Secretary Li always talked about this in his ears. He didn't know how she knew all this. Later, he found out that Secretary Li and Su Mu had become best friends. He didn't care as long as it didn't affect Secretary Li's work. The night was a little dark. Yi Xiangnan and Qin Xian drank until 11 o'clock, and neither of them had any intention to continue. One of them had a wife who was pregnant, and the other had to work the next day, so they were ready to ask the driver to pick them up early. Qin Xian left first, leaving Yi Xiangnan alone in the washroom, preparing to wash his face before leaving. But when he walked over, he found that someone was already washing his face. He wanted to give up, but after thinking about it, he walked over. Su Mu was washing her face. She drank a little too much. The dads in the private room weren't interested enough in the commercials, so Sister Hong was socializing. Sister Hong was very strong-minded. No matter how good their new article was, they still had to attract advertisements for the newspaper. Otherwise, if there were only people reading it, without any income, the whole team would starve to death. In the past, Su Mu had thought that all she needed to do was interview or write. Now, she knew that it wasn't that easy. She even had to get advertisers to drink with her. Su Mu couldn't accept it at first, but when she saw that Sister Hong's eyes were red from staying up all night writing, and she still had to socialize at night, she felt that she was a little unreasonable. Actually, it wasn't a big deal to have a meal. Su Mu's alcohol tolerance wasn't good, and Sister Hong had been helping her, so she could tell that she had suffered quite a bit. At this time, Su Mu said that she was quitting, but she couldn't do it. Once, Sister Hong drank too much and leaned against the wall with a cigarette in her hand. She said to Su Mu, "This is actually how this industry is. It's not as simple as you think, and there are many sacrifices when necessary." Su Mu was a little surprised. She didn't know. Sister Hong smiled. "It depends on what you think. If you don't want to, no one will force you. But if you want to achieve results and become a famous media person, you have to do this. Those without a background can only become a stepping stone for others." Why do you think Du Meili followed Zhang Fucai? It's because she doesn't want to come out to drink with others. She only needs to accompany one man, and then she will have a reputation and marry a good man. Chapter 50-37. Sister Hong turned her head. Su-mu, it's dark everywhere. Even those of us who write about the darkness are in the dark, and there's nowhere to escape. Su-mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything for a long time. Sister Hong raised her head and puffed out a smoke ring. It's not as complicated as you think. Those who are willing to take the big cut, and those who are not willing to just drink and earn a fixed salary. Besides, the higher-ups also have to entertain. Otherwise, why would they let you write about these things? Sister Hong said and raised her head without saying a word. Su-mu looked at her at that time and suddenly understood. Sister Hong sacrificed herself for others for her ideals. Last time they went to interview, if it weren't for Sister Hong's connections, they wouldn't have been able to enter the scene at all. Su-mu didn't dare to ask whether these connections were obtained at the table or somewhere else. Sister Hong patted her. Don't be like this. You still have a son, don't you? Su-mu was quite sad. Sister Hong said that she didn't like her, but she cared about her very much. At this time, she looked at Yi Xiangnan, and her heart was even more touched. She thought of Sister Hong. She thought of those people whom Sister Hong had to curry favor with. Did Yi Xiannan also include these people? Did Yi Xiannan also make things difficult for the female reporter? She lowered her eyes and didn't want to talk to him. She had only taken a step when her wrist was caught by someone. Then, Su-mu was thrown against the wall. She was dizzy from the fall, and then Yi Xiangnan trapped her. He drank. She turned her face away, and her breathing was messy. Because she also drank. Yi Xiannan was quite angry. She reached out and pinched Su Qingsang's chin. Should I call you Miss Su or Mrs. Yi, huh? In a place like the club, she was drunk like this, and there was a smell of smoke on her body. He didn't need to think about who she was drinking with. He had already seen Lu Hong's tricks. In the past, he didn't think that she would come out to socialize, but now, she showed up in public and wore a dress. What the hell is this? Why is she wearing a skirt in the middle of winter? Wear it for those old perverts to see. He looked down and stared at the tight dress she was wearing for a long time. Su-mu was a little embarrassed. Yi Xiangnan, let go of me, you bastard. She had drunk some wine, so she was already weak. At this moment, she could not exert any strength at all. Yi Xiangnan stared at her with a strange expression on his face. When you drink, have you ever drunk while sitting on someone else's lap? He had seen this kind of thing many times, and many women had thrown themselves at him. However, ordinary women couldn't get close to him. Most of them were accepted by his subordinates. Was Su-mu doing something that only women would do? Just thinking about it made him feel like he was about to go crazy. She was, even if she wasn't his woman, she was still the mother of Cymbidium chinense. A good woman shouldn't be entangled with men. She shouldn't fool around outside. She was drunk like this. Did she agree to those men's unreasonable requests for the sake of her career? The more Yi Xiangnan thought about it, the angrier he got. His face kept approaching, and Su-mu kept retreating. In the end, there was simply no way to retreat. Tell me, have you ever, with other men? He didn't say the last few words, but she knew it, even though she drank a little too much. Su-mu opened her eyes wide. She was ashamed and angry. She raised her hand and was about to slap him. But Yi Xiannan didn't even think before grabbing her wrist and holding it above her body. Chapter 50-38. Then, he lowered his head. Perhaps it was the effect of alcohol. Su-mu struggled for a while and didn't reject him anymore. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck. They crawled together harmoniously. Early in the morning, when she woke up, the light was so bright that she instinctively blocked it with her hands. When she came back to her senses, she sat up immediately. This was the hotel bedroom. Sumu lowered her head and looked around. She recalled last night, when she and Yi Xiannan were together. She bit her lips and tried to get up, but she heard a faint voice coming from outside. It was Yi Xiangnan. His tone was businesslike, as if he was telling Secretary Li something. Sumu bit her lips, pulled her bathrobe closer and went out barefooted. She thought that it was Secretary Li outside, but she didn't expect it to be Secretary Xiao and a few other senior executives. The most eye-catching thing was that Shen Wenshuan was among them. They were sitting on a sofa and seemed to be in a meeting. When Sumu saw them, her mind was in a mess. She didn't even think of going back to the bedroom. At this moment, everyone in the meeting heard her gasp and looked over at the same time. Sumu bit her lips, feeling too ashamed to show her face. She and Yi Xiangnan had already gotten their divorce certificate. Now that they had spent a night together, no one would believe that nothing had happened. Moreover, she didn't know and couldn't remember clearly. She was so drunk that she couldn't remember clearly. He had been drinking last night too. How could he be standing here fine while she was in such a mess? Shen Wenshuan's eyes met with Sumu's inadvertently. Sumu felt especially uncomfortable. "Sorry, I drank too much," she said as she walked into the bedroom. Yi Xiangnan's eyes were fixed on her. He called Secretary Xiao over and said something in a low voice. Secretary Xiao was a little surprised. He stared at CEO Yi for a while. "CEO Yi, are you sure?" Yi Xiangnan said indifferently, "Go." Secretary Xiao nodded and walked into the bedroom. The meeting outside continued. Sumu had just changed her clothes. With so many people in the hotel bedroom, she was not used to wearing a bathrobe, even if no one could see it. Secretary Xiao pushed the door open and coughed lightly. "Miss Su." She was quite emotional. She was CEO Ye's second secretary, and CEO Ye had asked her to come over this morning instead of his trusted assistant, Secretary Li. In the past, when CEO Yi treated Miss Su like a little baby, it was absolutely impossible for her to be so close to him. However, it was different now. CEO Yi didn't seem to care much about Miss Su's feelings. Although CEO Yi didn't care, Secretary Xiao still spoke politely. Even if it was polite, it didn't sound nice. "Miss Sumu, our CEO Yi wants you to take the medicine by yourself. If you have an allergic reaction, you will be reimbursed for the medical expenses. And this is last night's check." Secretary Xiao pushed a 100,000 yuan check to Sumu. Her heart was trembling. Everyone knew that Sumu's temper wasn't very good. That was why Secretary Xiao was a little afraid. Sumu stared at her and then sighed. "Will you do whatever Yi Xiangnan asks you to do?" Secretary Xiao heard that she was restraining herself from her tone. She couldn't say anything but just smiled bitterly. CEO Yi really loved Secretary Li. If she didn't let Secretary Li come today, she would become the cannon fodder. Sumu looked down. "Can I let Mr. Yi in?" She was so polite that people couldn't bear to refuse. Secretary Xiao and others had been warned by Secretary Li in the company that they could offend anyone but Miss Su. Chapter 5039. Secretary Xiao and the others had been warned by Secretary Li in the company that they could offend anyone but Miss Su. Miss Su was the mother of Cymbidium Chinense. In the future, the company would belong to Cymbidium Chinense, so they couldn't offend Sumu. Secretary Xiao thought for a moment and took the initiative to report the work. After listening to Secretary Xiao, Yi Xiangnan looked particularly impatient. Then, he left the group of senior executives and walked to the bedroom. What's the matter that can't be said later? With that, he closed the door. The senior executives outside couldn't leave, nor could they eavesdrop. They could only drink tea and chat together. Of course, Shen Wenxuan's position in this situation was rather delicate. Everyone in Starlight knew that he and Su Mu used to be lovers. They thought that after CEO Yi and Miss Su lost their chance, Shen Wenxuan would. Who knew that they would see such a scene today? Early in the morning, CEO Yi called the company and said that the meeting venue had been changed to a hotel. They thought it would be a business suite and everyone would drink tea and have a meeting together. CEO Yi wanted everyone to relax. They thought that CEO Yi had found his conscience and would drink tea first, then, there would be other activities. But now they knew that CEO Yi had exercised and relaxed last night. He had no intention of letting them relax at all. They were so miserable, so they had to do what they had to do. However, Lawyer Shin deserved the most sympathy. It was said that Lawyer Shin was deeply in love. It was very painful to not get what he wanted. Just the thought of others being more miserable than them made them happy. Shen Wenxuan packed up his things and left. Someone stopped him. Lawyer Shin, CEO Yi hasn't finished the meeting yet. Shen Wenxuan's voice was indifferent. CEO Yi probably isn't in the mood for the meeting. Let's go. He left straight away. Then, the senior executives chatted, and Secretary Xiao also listened on the side. Did you know that the little princess of the Yi family likes Shen Wenxuan? She didn't start because of Miss Su, but now it's impossible for Lawyer Shin and Miss Su to be together. No man can stand the scene today. I think Lawyer Shin is going to soar. This pair of lovers really played a big game of chess. Both of them took down CEO Ye's two pets. That's right. So when you see Lawyer Shin's calm demeanor, he might not be thinking about his former lover, but about riches and honor. I can understand. 20 less years of struggle. Shen Wenxuan couldn't hear it, but he could imagine what the people in the company were saying about him. He walked out of the hotel and saw Yi Hui in the lobby. Starlight and the princess of the Yi clan. She was a real princess. She didn't have to worry about food or clothing. Whatever she wanted, someone would give it to her. Indeed, compared to her, Su Mu was like a wild grass growing in the wild. Shen Wenxuan walked towards Yi Hui. Yi Hui got up from the sofa. Lawyer Shin. Shen Wenxuan smiled faintly. Your elder brother and sister-in-law are upstairs. It may not be convenient for you to go up. Yi Hui was stunned for a moment. It wasn't because her brother and Su Mu were together. It wasn't strange for them to be together. She also heard about it, so she came over. She was surprised that Shen Wenxuan called her elder brother and sister-in-law. Did he let go of Su Mu? She looked at his handsome face and was a little absent-minded for a moment. Shen Wenxuan was still smiling. Let's have a cup of tea when you have time. Chapter 50-40. Yi Hui was lost in thought again. Shen Wenxuan took her bag for her and gently touched her shoulder with one hand. Let's go. It was very natural. It was as if they had been together for a long time. Later, Shen Wenxuan spent 3 months to settle Yi Hui, get married, and have a child 7 months later. One could well imagine how fast he was. Just like what those people said, he became a person who struggled for 20 years less. But did he do it for himself? No, he didn't have much ambition for wealth. He just wanted to be close to someone and have a legitimate reason to look at someone. It was obvious that the other woman lying next to him was not the one he loved, but he could still live peacefully and face Yi Xiangnan and Su Mu calmly. That was all in the future. At this moment, Yi Xiangnan pushed the door open. Su Mu stood by the bed. He frowned. I heard from Secretary Xiao that you wanted to see me. What are you doing? He paused for a moment. Are you afraid of allergies? Sumu, why aren't you afraid of allergies when you drink? Sumu glared at him. It has nothing to do with you. Then it has something to do with me when you take the medicine. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have had to take the medicine, so I will take responsibility. His expression was still impatient, as if Sumu was being unreasonable. Sumu was furious. Yi Xiangnan, I don't want you to take responsibility. His face darkened. Yes, you don't need me to take responsibility. Miss Su, you just need to give birth to the child and throw it to me. As for what happens to the child, it doesn't matter, right? You can continue to do this kind of shameless work. When it comes to drinking and singing with men, what else do you not know? What else do you not dare to do? If he wasn't sure that she only had him, he really wanted to strangle her right now. However, she was drunk last night, so he couldn't see it. In addition, he was also a little out of touch. Yi Xiangnan frowned. Tell me, have you had other men recently? As he spoke, he approached her. Sumu bit her lip. She was so angry that she leaned against the bed and said angrily, It's none of your business. How is it none of my business? He trapped her in his arms. If we have a child, I don't know if it's mine or someone else's. Sumu glared at him fiercely. He narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, What, are you scared? I didn't. After Sumu said that, she turned her face to the side. He still didn't let her go and said some nasty things. Sumu was so angry that she wanted to cry. Tears slid down the corners of her eyes and fell on the bedsheets. Yi Xiangnan was stunned. Then, he straightened his body and looked at her with a frown. You have the guts to drink there. Why? Are you crying after I said a few words? Sumu bit her lips and did not want to talk to him. Seeing her cry, Yi Xiangnan was a little annoyed and coughed. Don't cry. She still cried and buried her face in the quilt. Yi Xiangnan was helpless. Sumu, you were taken advantage of by a man when you were drunk. It was too late to cry. Only you would do that. Her voice was muffled. And I wasn't drunk. He sneered. So you came with me willingly. Sumu, don't tell me you've forgotten everything. She didn't forget everything. She even remembered it very clearly. Sumu turned her face to the side and didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Xiangnan leaned over. You didn't do it willingly. Why are you crying? Sumu really couldn't stand him. She did drink too much last night, but she knew that it was Yi Xiangnan. Chapter 50-41. 1 second to remember, Sumu really couldn't stand his naughtiness. She did drink too much last night, but she also knew that the person with her was Yi Xiangnan. He wasn't wrong at all, so there was no way she could face him. Yi Xiangnan lowered her head and looked at her. She suddenly laughed bitterly. All right, get up. It's not like I'm really going to do anything to you. He straightened his body and looked like a calm young master again. Sumu pursed her lips and didn't speak for a long time. Her whole body was weak, and she couldn't get up at once. But Yi Xiangnan thought too much. He looked at her and said, You can't bear to leave. Sumu bit her lips and used all her strength to prop herself up. She didn't want to be misunderstood as a scam, and she didn't want to be looked down upon by him. So no matter how uncomfortable she was, she still propped herself up and walked out step by step. Yi Xiangnan stopped her. Sumu, think it over. Sumu turned her head and looked at him quietly. Yi Xiangnan's voice was a little lower. Think it over. Do you want to continue to play with me or come back to me? Su Mu's eyes looked down. After a long time, she said softly, "Last night was an accident. Yi Xiangnan, you don't need to tell me what to do in the future, and you don't need to care about me. After all, we have nothing to do with each other. I won't do anything to discredit Cymbidium chinense. That's it. Nothing else." Yi Xiangnan stood there and looked at her quietly. Then, he chuckled, "Su Mu, you really have a backbone. You'd rather beg those people outside for tens of thousands of advertising fees and drink with them than beg me." He was probably laughing out of anger. "I really don't know what kind of circuit is in your brain." Su Mu looked at him quietly. After a while, she said in a low and hoarse voice, "Just take it that I'm stupid and don't deserve CEO Yi." Yi Xiangnan was angry, but he couldn't be angry at her. Just like what she said, they had nothing to do with each other, so why should he be angry? Su Mu walked to the door, but Yi Xiangnan stopped her again. "Wait a minute." Su Mu turned her head away. He pondered for a moment. "You don't need to take the medicine." No matter how much of a jerk he was, he wouldn't be this jerk. He clearly knew that she was allergic, yet he still made her eat it. Su Mu immediately understood. Without saying anything, she opened the door and walked out. Outside the door, the executives were still there. Seeing Su Mu coming out, they all sat up straight, but they didn't dare to show contempt on their faces. Even if she left, she would still be CEO Ye's woman. CEO Ye obviously couldn't forget his feelings. He even chose to hold the meeting here and couldn't bear to leave even for a moment. True love, true love. After Su Mu left, Secretary Xiao walked to the door of the bedroom. "CEO Yi, do we still need to continue the meeting?" Yi Xiangnan raised his hand. "Where's Lawyer Shin?" Secretary Xiao was stunned and answered truthfully, "Lawyer Shin has left." "Oh, by the way, Miss Yi Hui said that she left first." Yi Xiangnan frowned and asked almost immediately, "What about Lawyer Shin?" Secretary Xiao shook his head. "Maybe she went back to the company." "I don't know." Lawyer Shin didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to say anything. He continued the meeting. In the following days, Qi and Su Mu seemed to have entered an endless cycle. CEO Ye's private life was naturally rich. Probably because he didn't have a wife or a girlfriend, he had no scruples. When Yuan had heard about it and warned him, but it was useless. Fortunately, he was just playing, and he didn't take it seriously. Chapter 50-42. 2 months later, something big happened in the Yi family. Yi Hui was pregnant, and the person who made her pregnant was Shen Wenxuan. Yi Mubai was furious, and when Yuan covered his face. As a mother, he didn't know what to do. But the child was innocent, and they couldn't just let it go. Besides, Yi Hui seemed to like Shen Wenxuan very much. Lawyer Shen was a good choice. Everyone in the Yi family knew his ability and talent. But he was Su Mu's first love. It would be fine if Su Mu and Yi Xiangnan didn't get married. If they got back together in the future, they could rekindle their old love in the same home. This made the two elders very worried. Both the palm and the back of the hand were flesh. What should they do? Yi Xiangnan punched Shen Wenxuan hard and said in a low voice, "Get married. What else can I do?" After the fight, he stood alone on the balcony smoking. The balcony was very dark, and the wind was strong at night. He stood quietly, wearing only a shirt, but he didn't feel cold. Yi Hui walked over and gently hugged his waist. She buried her face in his back and said in a voice like a kitten, "Brother, do you think I'm very disappointing?" Yi Xiangnan patted her gently and said in a hoarse voice, "You can like anyone, but you have to like Shen Wenxuan." Yi Hui apologized in a low voice. She didn't say anything bad about Shen Wenxuan. She just felt sorry for her brother. In fact, Yi Xiangnan could understand. Shen Wenxuan was indeed good-looking, capable, and elegant. Yi Hui had liked him before, but she didn't say it. He sighed, pulled his sister over, and whispered, "What else can you do? You already have a child. Give birth to it. It's good to get married and have children." Yi Hui wanted to say something but stopped. Yi Xiangnan patted her shoulder. "I don't like Su Mu as much as you think. It's all in the past, and her heart is not with me. Why do you want to force her?" Yi Hui couldn't say what she wanted to say. She could persuade him in the past, but now she had no position. When she turned around, she saw Shen Wenxuan standing there. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Yi Hui shivered. She did not know why. She was wearing a lot of clothes, but at this moment, she felt very cold. It was probably because in Shen Wenxuan's eyes, she did not see what she wanted to see. It was probably because she felt that she would never receive his love in this lifetime. Yi Hui's lips moved. She even wanted to go back on her words. She wanted to say that she had given birth to this child. But only for a moment, Shen Wenxuan's gaze became very warm. She could not refuse his warmth. Yi Xiangnan gently pushed Yi Hui away. "Go downstairs first. I have something to say to Shen Wenxuan." Yi Hui was worried. She bit her lip and looked at her brother for a long time. Yi Xiangnan softened his tone. "Nothing will happen. Let's go downstairs first." Yi Hui nodded. When she passed by Shen Wenxuan, she looked up at him. Shen Wenxuan gave her a smile and patted her. "Listen to your brother." Yi Hui replied with an "oh" and went downstairs obediently. She still looked back every 3 steps. After Yi Hui went downstairs, Yi Xiangnan lit a cigarette and leaned against the railing of the balcony. His voice was indifferent. "There is no one else now. Shen Wenxuan, did you seduce Yi Hui for Su Mu?" Shen Wenxuan walked to his side and also lowered his head to light a cigarette. "Why do you ask? This is not General Manager Ye's style. It is not Lawyer Shen's style to struggle for 20 years less." There was a touch of ruthlessness in Yi Xiangnan's eyes. "Yi Hui is very simple. I am not stupid. You are not interested in her at all." Chapter 50-43. It's free. Interest can be cultivated, just like how CEO Yi treats Su Mu. There was an imperceptible flame in Shen Wenxuan's eyes. It could be called provocation or something else. There was an imperceptible flame in Shen Wenxuan's eyes. It could be called provocation or something else. Yi Xiannan narrowed her eyes and sneered, "Looks like you're using Yi Hui to threaten me. I'm not good to Su Mu, so you're not good to Yi Hui either, is that right?" Shen Wenxuan looked down and smiled gently. "CEO Yi, are all problems so complicated?" Yi Xiangnan spat out a few words. "Everyone knows Sima Zhao's heart. Shen Wenxuan, Yi Hui is a very good woman. She is so kind that she is a little silly. If you treat her badly, I will not let you go." Shen Wenxuan just smiled and did not speak. They did not know that Yi Hui was just around the corner, listening to them in a daze. She had always known that Shen Wenxuan still had his sister-in-law in his heart. But she had never thought that a person could like someone so much that he would get close to another person for her, even do that kind of thing with her, get her pregnant, and marry her. Yi Hui was shocked. She was stunned for a long time before she came back to her senses. Later, when she went downstairs with the help of the handrail, she fainted. The child was still alive and was sent to the hospital in time. At the same time, it also alarmed the Shen family. The Shin family was surprised and happy about this marriage. It was naturally good to be able to associate with the Yi family. But Shin Wenyuan and Wenyuan had been unhappy before, and she was one-sidedly taught a lesson by Wenyuan. But now it was different. Yi Hui was pregnant with Shin Wenchuan's child. Shin Wenyuan seemed to have forgotten the previous unhappiness. She immediately asked the servants to make soup and brought it to the hospital. She whispered that Shin's father and mother were already on the plane and could not wait to come over. Yi Hui was not in good spirits and did not want to deal with this sister-in-law. Shin Wenyuan did not care. Her attitude was completely like she was treating her baby. In the end, Shin Wenchuan asked her to leave first. When she left, he sat in front of the bed and filled a bowl of soup. "Do you want some?" There was no one else now. Yi Hui lay quietly. Her black hair fell on the pillow and her face was buried. Seeing her like this, Shin Wenchuan put down the bowl and said softly, "You don't want this child, do you?" Yi Hui shook her head. Shin Wenchuan sighed. "Yi Hui, I'm not as dark as you think." "But you don't love me that much either," Yi Hui said. Yi Hui tilted her head and stared at him. Her eyes were watery and her nose was red. He had never seen her like this before. Yi Hui had always been a happy and gentle girl. She did as she pleased and didn't lack anything, so she did whatever she wanted and lived in a naive fairy tale. He did not know whether he truly loved her or envied her. Yi Hui, Yi, and Yi was Yi. The children of the Yi family and the Qin family were mostly like this. Only Su Mu must live tenaciously like weeds. In Yi Xiangnan's eyes, her advantages were all shortcomings. Shin Wenchuan sighed softly. "I like you, and I like children." Yi Hui looked at him for a long time and then closed her eyes. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. She had grown up for the first time to understand love and know that she was not loved. Yi Hui fell asleep. When she woke up, it was dark again. Shin Wenchuan was beside her, and the ward was also very warm. Seeing her open her eyes, Shin Wenchuan whispered, "You're awake." Chapter 50-44. Seeing her open her eyes, Shin Wenchuan whispered, "You're awake. Have you been here all the time?" Yi Hui asked him softly. Shin Wenchuan smiled. "Yes. The doctor came and said that the child is fine." Yi Hui gently rested her head on the pillow and lowered her eyes. "Shin Wenchuan, if one day, Su Mu comes to you and wants to be with you, will you abandon me and the child?" Shin Wenchuan asked. "No," he said without hesitation. Yi Hui looked up. "Why do you want to be with me?" Shin Wenchuan smiled. "Because you are a very good girl, suitable for me and suitable for marriage." This answer was perfect. It didn't give her too much expectation, and it also told her that it was not as dark as she thought. Yi Hui knew that it was not. He mostly did it for Su Mu. At least at the beginning, he got close to Su Mu. She couldn't blame others. From the beginning to the end, Shin Wenchuan and Su Mu were the victims, and the Yi family just had more choices because of their power. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "I want to see Su Mu. Can you help me call her over?" Shin Wenchuan sighed. "Yi Hui, are you sure?" Yi Hui didn't say anything, but gently closed her eyes. When Su Mu came, it was already past 9:00 in the evening. She was wearing thick clothes, and there was a little cold wind in the ward. Yi Hui wanted to sit up, but Su Mu let her lie down. "You are not in good health. Why do you want to get up?" She didn't know the details, but this was the obstetrics department, and Shin Wenchuan was here. How could Su Mu not know? She had a good impression of Yi Hui. Yi Hui used to help her and take care of Cymbidium chinense. It was impossible for her to have feelings for Yi Hui because of Shen Wenxuan. Life had long worn away Su Mu's feelings. She took off her coat and put it on the sofa. She silently made another bowl of soup and fed it to Yi Hui. Yi Hui was surprised and ashamed. She called her sister-in-law in a low voice. "You call me sister-in-law, so you have to listen to me and drink the soup." Su Mu pursed her lips and said softly. Yi Hui nodded and drank the soup with her eyes down. In fact, she did nothing wrong. In the relationship between her and Shen Wenxuan, she was passive. Shen Wenxuan didn't do anything wrong. It was impossible for him and Su Mu to be together. It was understandable that he wanted to be with Yi Hui. It was just that Yi Hui felt sorry for Su Mu if they were together. Big Brother would definitely re-examine his relationship with Su Mu. Her intuition told her that it was unlikely. With Big Brother's domineering personality, it was unlikely that he would keep Su Mu by his side. Maybe it was for her. That was why Yi Hui felt sorry for Su Mu. Su Mu didn't mind. There was nothing between her and Yi Xiannan in the first place. Yi Hui is, she said, will. Yi Hui bit her lower lip. "Will you attend my wedding?" Su Mu smiled. "I will." Yi Hui smiled with tears in her eyes. She smiled cautiously. Su Mu didn't stay for long. She left after a while. Shen Wenxuan walked her to the door of the ward and stopped. With their current identities, it was impossible for them to be together. "Take good care of her," Su Mu said softly. Then she chuckled. "Yi Hui is fine." Shen Wenxuan put his hands in his pockets and didn't say anything. He just smiled faintly. Su Mu put on a scarf and said goodbye to him. When they arrived at the elevator, the door opened. The person who came out was Yi Xiangnan. He happened to come to see Yi Hui with Cymbidium chinense. Chapter 50-45. When Cymbidium chinense saw Su Mu, it immediately became happy and hugged her. "Mommy." Su Mu was also a little surprised. She bent down and asked, "Did you come with Daddy?" Cymbidium chinense said obediently. Su Mu looked up at Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan said calmly, "There is a small restaurant downstairs. Take Cymbidium chinense there and bring him back in an hour." Su Mu thanked him in a low voice. When she was about to leave with Cymbidium chinense, Yi Xiangnan asked her again, "Why are you here?" She thought for a while before she understood what he meant. She said, "Yi Hui asked me to come here." She looked at him. Yi Xiangnan smiled and didn't say anything else. He went straight into the VIP ward. Su Mu looked at his back for a long time without saying anything. Cymbidium chinense pulled her hand and said, "Mommy." Su Mu nodded. "All right, let's go eat something." Cymbidium chinense was still thinking about Little Ant. "Mommy, after eating, shall we go see Little Ant together? I heard from Daddy that Little Ant has a baby. It's Uncle Shen." The little guy probably realized something and didn't say anything. His voice was very soft. Su Mu smiled. "Yes, Aunt and Uncle Shen like each other and are going to get married soon. So, Cymbidium chinense has to call Uncle Shen uncle in the future and don't mention Mommy in front of them. Do you understand?" She squatted down and looked at her son. "Promise Mommy that you will remember this." Cymbidium chinense opened his eyes wide and said, "Mommy, I will remember." But there was more or less some grievance in his voice. The baby was about to be born. He had parents, but Cymbidium chinense didn't have a mother. Now his mother was very tired and had lost weight. Cymbidium chinense was a little sad at such a young age. He held his mother's body with his little hands and didn't say anything. Sumu's heart was also warm and indescribable. Cymbidium chinense, when mommy makes money, I will take you back. Or when you are older, you will know how to take care of yourself, okay? Sumu coaxed him gently. In fact, she also knew that this day would come so far. Maybe when that day came, Cymbidium chinense would be used to the current life and wouldn't need her anymore. However, he was so young now. When Yi Hui's child was born, Yi and Yi, Cymbidium chinense would take care of him. Sumu pursed her lips. She felt that she should talk to Yi Xiangnan. It was not a good idea for Cymbidium chinense to always be taken care of by an old man. As she was thinking, she looked up and saw Yi Xiangnan leaning against the wall, looking at her quietly. Sumu's lips moved, but she didn't say a word. Yi Xiangnan's voice was indifferent. Yi Hui is asleep. Let's go eat. With that, he picked up Cymbidium chinense and went into the elevator. He stood inside and saw Sumu not moving. He frowned and said, "Don't you want to eat with your son?" Sumu woke up. She still had something to talk to him about, so she immediately followed him to the elevator. In the elevator, the two adults didn't speak, and the atmosphere was quite heavy. Sumu bit her lips and kept her head down. She was wearing a very ordinary down jacket. It was a little awkward standing with Yi Xiangnan. She was also a little embarrassed, but he didn't seem to care. After hanging up the phone, Yi Xiangnan took her and Cymbidium chinense to the car. Sumu didn't move. "Didn't you say that there is a restaurant downstairs?" He glanced at her, carried his son to the back seat, fastened the seatbelt, and then got in the car himself. Chapter 50-46. He sat in the car and did not call out to her. He just gently tapped the steering wheel. After a while, Sumu got in the car herself. She sat beside him and did not say a word. Yi Xiangnan turned his head and glanced at her. He was also quite speechless. She was speechless to him. Last time, why couldn't he help but bring her to the hotel? She was obviously very ordinary. Previously, he was worried that she would be taken advantage of by others. Now that he thought about it, he was really thinking too much. Sister Hong was probably more popular than her. He silently looked at her for a few seconds and started the car. It was still the same vegetarian restaurant. He asked for a private room, a pot of chicken soup, and a few nourishing dishes. After Yi Xiangnan finished ordering, he looked at Sumu. "If you continue to lose weight, in the future, the Parent-Teacher Association and Cymbidium chinense will think that you are a refugee." It was not a day or two that he had a sharp tongue, but Sumu did not care about him. She only talked to Cymbidium chinense. These days, she was a little busy, and she had not seen Cymbidium chinense for a long time. The weather was also cold, and she could not bear to let Cymbidium chinense run around. So, she missed him very much. Yi Xiangnan glanced at her and did not say anything else. He just drank his tea. He felt that, with Sumu's current salary, could she support herself? Fortunately, her son was brought to her side. Otherwise, how much hardship would he suffer with her? When the dishes came, Sumu ate very little. Of course, Yi Xiangnan would not serve her food like last time. Now that their relationship was different, Cymbidium chinense was like a little warm boy, quietly taking care of his mother. After eating, Yi Xiangnan went outside to smoke a cigarette. When he came back, he opened the door and Cymbidium chinense was pestering his mother to talk. Sumu's face was full of gentleness. He thought that if she had been half as gentle to him as Cymbidium chinense, and less rigid, they would not be where they were today. As he thought about it, he smiled and leaned against the door. Cymbidium chinense, it's time to go home. He looked at Sumu. Miss Su, do you want me to take you home? This unfamiliar form of address made Sumu swallow the words she wanted to say. They were so unfamiliar with each other. How could she have the face to discuss the Cymbidium chinense with him? If she did, he would probably say that she was too demanding. She looks down. Don't bother Mr. Yi. Yi Xiangnan stared at her for a while and spat out a few words, up to you. As he spoke, he picked up his son. All right, let's go back. Cymbidium chinense was a little reluctant. At the same time, he was a sensible child. He didn't want his mother to go back by bus. So he pulled Yi Xiangnan's sleeve and said in a low voice, Dad, can you see my mother off? Yi Xiangnan looked at Cymbidium chinense and then looked at Sumu. He seemed to say helplessly, let's go. She is so pitiful. Sumu still wanted to refuse, but he was already impatient. Sumu, can you not be so pretentious? Don't take your aloofness as a virtue. Sometimes it is very annoying and a waste of everyone's time. He said it very impolitely and very directly. Sumu felt a little hurt in self-esteem. She wanted to refuse, but thinking that his words were so unpleasant, she bit her lower lip and walked to Yi Xiangnan. Then I'll trouble you, Mr. Yi. It's just a piece of cake. It's not trouble. Yi Xiangnan's voice was light. Sumu didn't say anything. She followed him silently. After getting on the car, he turned sideways. Do you still live there? Sumu nodded. He started the car and snorted softly. After so many years, you are still so bad. Sumu, don't you need to reflect on yourself? Sumu didn't say anything. She turned her head to the outside of the car. Chapter 50-47. At this time, Cymbidium chinense spoke up for his mother. Mommy has to take care of me, so she hasn't been working properly. The little guy actually looked a little angry and didn't want to talk to his father. A person like Yi Xiangnan could naturally feel the little guy's emotions. He smiled and said, You really didn't raise this child for nothing. He's quite helpful. Sumu looked back at Cymbidium chinense, and Cymbidium chinense winked at her. Sumu's heart felt warm. No matter what, she still had Cymbidium chinense. Cymbidium chinense also felt warm. He sat in the back and looked at his mother with some longing. He wanted his mother to hug and kiss him, but he was a little embarrassed. The car stopped below Sumu's building. Sumu got out of the car, and Cymbidium chinense immediately wanted to get out. Sumu stood in front of the car door and hugged him. Okay, mommy is going upstairs. Yi-sun was a little reluctant to part with her, and he looked reluctant to part with her. Sumu felt a little sad, so she hugged him again and then let go. The car door closed, but Yi Xiangnan didn't immediately drive away. Instead, he looked at the little Cymbidium chinense and asked, Do you miss mommy? Cymbidium chinense nodded obediently. Yi Xiangnan unfastened his seatbelt, got out of the car and carried Cymbidium chinense out from the back. A good person is always at the bottom. I'll let you stay with your mommy for the night. Daddy will pick you up tomorrow morning. Be obedient. Don't kick the quilt at night. As he carried the little guy away, he scolded him. Cymbidium chinense was very happy. He hugged his neck in his father's arms and said, Daddy is so good. Yi Xiangnan was also quite helpless. He coughed lightly and said, Daddy is good now. Was Daddy not good before? Was he a bad person? Cymbidium chinense smiled. Cymbidium chinense did not say that. You think so? You little bastard. He pinched her nose. Are you blaming me because your mother and I didn't get together? This is a matter between the two of them. You can't just blame one of them. Their personalities are incompatible, understand? Cymbidium chinense responded with an "oh" and obediently hugged his neck. When he arrived at Sumu's floor, he reached out and knocked on the door. When Sumu opened the door, she was quite surprised. She looked at the big one and the small one, and after a long time, she murmured, "Why are you here?" Yi Xiangnan looked at the large pile of documents on the small dining table and the notebook. Apart from this, there was really nothing else. It still felt like a house with 4 bare walls. Yi Xiangnan put down Cymbidium chinense and said, "Cymbidium chinense wants to stay here for 1 night. Do you have time to take care of him?" Of course, Sumu missed her son, but she still had a lot of work to do. After thinking about it, she still squatted down and looked at Cymbidium chinense. Just when she wanted to say something, Cymbidium chinense's little face fell. Cymbidium chinense doesn't love mommy anymore. Sumu was also quite speechless. She stared at her son and explained helplessly, "How about a few days later? Mommy will have a day off on Saturday and Sunday." Cymbidium chinense felt very wronged. Today, he really wanted his mother. Sumu was also quite troubled and did not know what to say for a long time. Yi Xiangnan said calmly, "How about this? I'll stay and take care of Cymbidium chinense. You can do what you need to do." Looking at how Sumu was about to reject him, his voice was very calm. "Don't think too much. I'm just doing this for Cymbidium chinense." He even snorted lightly, as though she would want to eat swan meat. Sumu was also quite speechless. But no matter what, Cymbidium chinense was looking forward to it. His big eyes were filled with anticipation. She could only agree and said politely, "Thank you, Mr. Yi." Chapter 50-48. Yi Xiangnan smiled gently. "Sumu, there's no need to be so formal in private. You can just call me Yi Xiangnan." After that, he carried his son and left without waiting for her reply. Sumu looked at his back and bit the tip of her pen. The reason why she was willing to let him stay was because of Cymbidium chinense. She was not a little girl anymore. She could tell that Yi Xiangnan was not interested in her at all. It was good. They were finally strangers, and there was only politeness between them. She continued to work. Cymbidium chinense had not spent the night here for a long time. He was very excited and asked his father to give him a bath. After the bath, he put on his pajamas and came over to Sumu's side, asking for a hug. Sumu never knew that Cymbidium chinense was so clingy. However, she had not hugged Cymbidium chinense like this for a long time. After the small person took a bath, he smelled good. Sumu hugged him for a long time before he was willing to go to sleep. Before leaving, he reluctantly said, "Good night, mommy. Go to bed early." Sumu nodded and patted his little head again. Yi Xiangnan looked at the motherly and filial son. It seemed that he had nothing to do with it. He went outside to smoke a cigarette. When he turned back, Cymbidium chinense was finally willing to sleep. He obediently climbed onto the bed and covered himself with the small blanket. Yi Xiangnan helped him put away the blanket and went to take a shower. He was used to taking 2 showers a day, so he could make do with it here. After coming out, he saw that Sumu still had work to do. He sat on the simple sofa and took out his phone to read the news. After about an hour, his legs were numb, but Sumu was still reading the information. Yi Xiangnan said calmly, "How much money do you earn in a month? You're working so hard. If your publishing firm was full of fools like you, it would have been listed long ago. Sumu glanced at him, then lowered her head and whispered, "Aren't you sleeping with Cymbidium chinense?" "I don't sleep this early." His habit was to go to bed at 12 a.m., and it was only 10 a.m. now. Sumu said, "Mr. Ye's nightlife is rich." When he heard what she said, he suddenly became naughty. "How can I have nightlife without you? You think too highly of me. Or do you want me to find another woman?" "But Sumu, it seems that you are also a woman outside now." What she couldn't bear to hear the most was his words. She didn't want to talk to him at all. Yi Xiangnan chuckled. "Isn't it? But after we separated, it seems like I also." "Yi Xiangnan, you don't have to say any more." Sumu bit her lips and said in a low voice. She was a little embarrassed. Just because she was so poor that she couldn't support herself, he looked down on her so easily. Could he say whatever he wanted to say? Sumu looked down and there was a trace of pain in her eyes. She had also worked hard to survive. She had sacrificed a lot and had to socialize. She didn't have anything to do with other men for money. On the contrary, she couldn't drink much and often vomited. But even so, she still worked hard to survive. She was sad in her heart, but she didn't want to tell him. She just looked down and continued to read the documents quietly. Yi Xiangnan was a little unreasonable. "I want to eat noodles." "Make it yourself. There are ingredients in the kitchen." Sumu said softly. She definitely wouldn't allow him to do that. Yi Xiangnan glared at her. After a long time, he finally went to the kitchen. Not only did he make noodles for himself, but he also made a bowl for Sumu. 5 words less em. Chapter 50-49. Not only did he cook his own noodles, but he also cooked a bowl for Sumu. When he brought out the thing, Sumu was shocked. What was it? It was a ball of paste. She didn't know whether it was noodles or something else. She looked at Yi Xiangnan speechlessly. Yi Xiangnan said kindly, "Eat it, I cooked it." "I know you cooked it." Sumu stared at the terrible thing. "Eat it yourself." "I can't eat it." Sumu looked down. "Eat it yourself." So Yi Xiangnan said, "You can't eat it and you want me to eat it. Miss Su, is this how you treat your guests? You can leave now. No one is stopping you." Sumu looked up. Yi Xiangnan stared at her. You think I won't leave? It doesn't matter whether you leave or not." She finally couldn't stand him. "CEO Yi, just call them if you want to eat anything. I think Secretary Li can do it for you. If not, there's still Secretary Xiao. I just want to eat a bowl of noodles." He stared at her. "Go to the kitchen." Sumu couldn't do anything about him. Seriously, even Cymbidium chinense wasn't as troublesome as him. She went to cook the vegetable and shredded meat noodles. She made it very thin and sprinkled a layer of sesame oil on it. It smelled very fragrant. She took it out and gave it to Yi Xiangnan. "Eat it." Yi Xiangnan saw that she didn't have any and asked casually. Sumu buried herself in the documents again. "I don't have the habit of eating supper." He ate it alone and went out to smoke a few cigarettes after eating. When he came back, Sumu was still busy. Yi Xiangnan didn't say anything this time. He went directly to the small room of Cymbidium chinense and closed the door. She wasn't his wife, so he naturally wouldn't care too much. Early the next morning, when he woke up, Sumu had already woken up and was preparing breakfast. She made millet porridge and 4 colored rice cakes, which looked very beautiful. Cymbidium chinense also ate with relish after waking up. Yi Xiangnan looked at the little guy's satisfied face. He knew that Cymbidium chinense wanted to follow its mother. No matter how well he or his mother treated the Cymbidium chinense in the Yi family, the most important person in the Cymbidium chinense heart was still Sumu. One could tell just by looking at him eating. Even when he was eating delicacies, he had never tasted so good. Yi Xiangnan ate a little and said, "Dad is waiting for you downstairs." He felt like having a smoke. Cymbidium chinense obediently agreed, and then looked at its mother eagerly. He wanted his mother and father to send him to school together. He wanted to stay as long as he could. However, Sumu reached out and touched his little head. She still refused. "Xiangnan, be good. Mom has a morning meeting early in the morning. Can you go with Dad?" Xiangnan was very unhappy and depressed. When Yi Xiangnan waited downstairs, little Cymbidium chinense was still depressed. He probably guessed it. He looked at Sumu and asked, "Don't you have time to send him?" Sumu said softly, "I have a morning meeting in the morning, and I have to go on a business trip in the afternoon." "How many days?" He frowned. He didn't care about her, but he felt that Sumu was so busy that Cymbidium chinense couldn't see his mother when he missed her. Sumu said in a low voice, "About 3 days. He will come back on Saturday." She looked at Cymbidium chinense again and said, "Mom will take you to eat delicious food on Saturday, okay?" Cymbidium chinense nodded hard, but he was still unhappy. A child of a few years old wanted to be sensible, but he still needed a mother at such a young age. Cymbidium chinense was unhappy when he got in the car. Sumu coaxed him for a long time, but it didn't work. Chapter 50-50. Sister Hong nodded in understanding. "The child is sick, so you should go back quickly." Sister Hong nodded in understanding. "The child is sick, so you should go back quickly." Sumu was a little worried. "Sister Hong, can you do it alone?" "Yes, it's okay." Sister Hong pushed her. "Go ahead." Sumu immediately used her mobile phone to book the nearest high-speed train. After that, she packed up her things. From here to the high-speed train station, she had to take a bus for about an hour or so. Finally, Sumu arrived at the high-speed train station. Just as she was about to check in, her mobile phone rang. She thought it was Yi Xiangnan calling and that Cymbidium chinense missed his mother, but when she picked up the phone, it was a strange voice. "Sister Hong is in my hands." Sumu was stunned, and then she heard Sister Hong's voice on the phone. It was quite sad. While she was in a trance, the phone was cut off. Sumu stood there for a few seconds, and the phone suddenly rang again. She thought it was the same person, and her voice was a little floaty. "Hello," but this time, it was Yi Xiangnan who called. His voice was a little tired. "When do you get off?" "I'll ask the driver to pick you up. Cymbidium chinense is not very good now. He has a high fever that hasn't subsided since last night." Sumu was still in a trance. She didn't know what she was saying. Something happened to Sister Hong. "I can't leave." "Yi Xiangnan, can you take care of Cymbidium chinense?" Yi Xiangnan frowned. "Sumu, do you know what you're saying? Cymbidium chinense wants to see you now. He's very sad." "I know." Sumu's tears fell. Something happened to Sister Hong. She might have been caught by someone. "I have to stay and save her." In the hospital, Yi Xiangnan stood in the corridor with his phone in his hand and said softly, "Sumu, is your son more important now, or is your Sister Hong or your job more important? I can help you find him, but you have to come back." Sumu's lips trembled. "How about Cymbidium chinense? It's not easy for you to still remember your son." Yi Xiangnan's voice was as cold as water. Su Mu apologized in a low voice. I'll come back as soon as I find Sister Hong. Even if he didn't work and didn't go anywhere, he would accompany Cymbidium Chinense. But now that something had happened to Sister Hong, it was possible that she was a woman. She couldn't just ignore a woman who had always been protecting her. After Su Mu finished speaking, she gently hung up the phone. On the other side, Yi Xiangnan listened to the busy tone of the phone and smiled coldly. There was only work in her heart. Was work that important to her? Was she really stupid? Did she think that Lu Hong would be fine if she was there? Yi Xiangnan stood there for a while. When Yuan came over and said, "What's wrong? Did Su Mu meet with some trouble?" Yi Xiangnan shook his head. No, Lu Hong is in some trouble. Maybe the locals don't want them to report, so they locked Lu Hong up and didn't allow Su Mu to leave. They're also afraid that the news will leak out. After saying that, he made a call to his assistant and asked him to handle this matter. No matter what, he had to bring Su Mu back as soon as possible. He told himself that this wasn't for Su Mu, but for his son. Cymbidium Chinense was hiding here and needed his mother very much. Su Mu really deserved to die. She was brave but not astute. She was so stupid that she thought she was so great and wanted to be a hero. How could one be a hero just because they wanted to? He chuckled softly, and when Yuan, who was beside him, sighed and used his own connections to deal with this matter. It even alarmed the person at the top, the youngest in the Wen family, but the one with the highest authority. Chapter 50-51. But that place was really far away from the Emperor. It took a lot of effort to get the person out, but it was already night time. There was no high-speed rail, so Su Mu rushed back the next day. On the other side, Yi Xiangnan hung up the phone and went back to the ward. The attending doctor was still diagnosing Cymbidium Chinense. Surgery may be needed. Yi Xiangnan frowned a little. Must it? The doctor nodded. There may be some water accumulation. It will be dangerous if we delay it. But Mr. Yi, don't worry. We used the most advanced minimally invasive surgery. The wound is small, and it will recover quickly. There will be no problem. The damage to the child is also very small. Yi Xiangnan was slightly relieved and looked at his mother beside him. When Yuan had been extremely sad, and he especially felt sorry for Cymbidium Chinense. At this time, everyone hoped that Su Mu could come back and be with Cymbidium Chinense. In fact, the child had always hoped to have a mother by his side, but he was too sensible and refused to say it. The more he behaved like this, the more people loved him. When Yuan sighed deeply, he and Yi Mubai actively contacted the doctor and arranged the surgery. Yi Xiangnan accompanied the child. Cymbidium Chinense woke up for a while and looked around when he opened his eyes. Then, there was some disappointment in his eyes. Yi Xiangnan knew that he was looking for Su Mu. He gently hugged him. Mom is on the way back. It's a little far. Cymbidium Chinense said, "Oh," and then closed his eyes again. This illness shocked the leader of the Wen family. He came to see the little fellow. In the afternoon, the surgery was arranged. All the members of the Yi family came, but Su Mu was not there. Everyone blamed Su Mu more or less, but few people could understand when Su Mu gave birth to Cymbidium Chinense. At that time, she was alone, lived in the cheapest ward, and ate in the canteen after delivery. When Cymbidium Chinense was born, it was Su Mu who took care of it. These were things that others could not understand. Everyone would only remember that when Cymbidium Chinense was sick, she, as his mother, had cruelly abandoned him and not stayed by his side. Perhaps only Cymbidium Chinense would believe in his mother's love for him and believe that his mother had her own difficulties. He had been asleep since the Cymbidium Chinense surgery. Sumu arrived at the hospital at 10:30 a.m. the next day. Sister Hong came with her. In addition to seeing the Cymbidium Chinense, she also wanted to thank Yi Xiangnan. If not for the Yi family, she would not have come out so quickly. The people in that place were too barbaric. She believed that no one would know that she would never be able to get out of there. Su Mu ran all the way to the ward. The ward was very quiet. When Yuan and Yi Mubai had been guarding her for the whole night. Finally, she was tired and went back to rest. In the huge ward, only Yi Xiangnan was guarding there. He sat on a sofa, his eyes bloodshot. Sister Hong came over and looked at the child. She said a few words to Yi Xiangnan and left. It was not convenient for an outsider like her to be present at such an occasion. After Sister Hong left, Sumu pursed her lips and said with some difficulty, Cymbidium Chinense, he had an operation. Yi Xiangnan raised his eyes and stared at her. His voice was very calm and cold. Before the operation, he kept asking when mother would come back. He was too young to understand. He even thought that he might not survive and would never see you again. He was very afraid. Sumu, you don't need me to tell you how sensitive Cymbidium Chinense is, do you? No matter how important others are, they are not as important as your son. Lu Hongren is back in one piece now, but your son is lying here experiencing despair. Do you know how much psychological impact this has on him? Chapter 50-52. Updated quickly, Yi Xiangnan's voice had been very soft and restrained. After all, they were in the ward and Cymbidium Chinense had not woken up yet. He wanted his son to rest for a while more. Sumu lowered her head. I'm sorry. This sentence was said to his son. Yi Xiangnan's face was cold as he curled his lips. Other than sorry, do you have anything else to say? At this moment, he hoped that she could say that she would not be a reporter anymore and would not go out in the future. She would accompany Cymbidium Chinense. He could fund her to open a shop or do something else. In any case, he wanted Cymbidium Chinense to see her whenever they wanted. Once was enough. He did not want Cymbidium Chinense to be disappointed again. Such a young child was lying on the operating table. He just wanted to see his mother. Su Mu did not speak. She leaned against the wall. She was also very tired. After running around for a day and night, she could not even remember when she had eaten. At this moment, her physical strength was already at its limit. However, she still forced herself to stand. She was unwilling to sit down. Her eyes kept staring at Cymbidium Chinense. She was afraid that she would miss a minute or a second and that Cymbidium Chinense would not see her when it woke up. Sumu kept staring at Cymbidium Chinense until her eyes were sore. Yi Xiangnan went out for about half an hour. When he came back, he took 2 sets of breakfast and threw one to Sumu. Sumu took it but did not eat it. He looked at her and said unpleasantly, "You're acting like a loving mother now. What were you doing earlier?" Since he said it so unpleasantly, Sumu had to eat a little even if she could not eat it. Otherwise, he would probably say something even worse. She lowered her head and nibbled on it gently. However, it really tasted like chewing wax. How could she eat it? After eating a little, he couldn't eat anymore and put it aside. Yi Xiangnan didn't seem to intend to go to the company today. His eyes fell on the face of Cymbidium Chinense and then on Sumu. In short, his expression was very unfriendly. Sumu kept standing, but he didn't ask her to sit down. Time was unbearable. A long time passed bit by bit. Yi-sun finally woke up. It was 12 in the afternoon. As soon as Cymbidium Chinense woke up, Sumu reached out and touched his little face. Her voice was slightly choked. Is Cymbidium Chinense feeling better? Yi Xiangnan also went over and looked at his precious son. Cymbidium Chinense opened its eyes and looked at its mother. After a while, he closed his eyes in pain. Mom. I'm here. Sumu reached out and touched his little face carefully. Be good. It won't hurt in 2 days. Actually, it wasn't very painful. It was just very uncomfortable. Moreover, Cymbidium Chinense couldn't drink or eat now. However, the little man just endured it and didn't make a sound. This was very much like Sumu's character. Sumu guarded him and didn't dare to talk to him. She just took care of him gently. Cymbidium Chinense fell asleep again. However, probably because he saw his mother, his little face was much calmer than before. There was even a faint smile on his lips. It was very cute. Yi Xiangnan's eyes fell on his son's face. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Do you still want to be a reporter?" Sumu looked down and said with difficulty after a long time, "This time was an accident. Can you guarantee that there won't be a next time? Or is it because you're lucky every time? The people who caught you are just people on the white side. Won't they meet the black side?" Yi Xiangnan's face was cold. Sumu, think about your son. He is still young. I don't want to have to tell him that something happened to you one day. Sumu looked up and looked straight into his eyes. Yi Xiangnan, being a reporter is not as dangerous as you think. Chapter 50-53. Yi Xiangnan didn't seem to want to say anything more to her. He just leaned on one side. Later, when Yuan and Yi Hui came, so they didn't quarrel anymore. When Yuan's mood was the most complicated. Looking at Cymbidium Chinense sleeping soundly and seeing Sumu's haggard face, he said in a low voice, "Find a lounge. You can have a rest too." In the end, she still talked to Sumu, just the two of them. When Yuan combed his hair and said in a low voice, "I encouraged you to go out and be a new intellectual woman, but now I don't know if it's wrong. Maybe I'm old and I can't bear to see my child suffer." She said with great difficulty, "Sumu, I thought you would be a fashion critic, but I didn't expect you to follow Lu Hong's path." When Yuan also knew a little about Sister Hong's situation. However, Sumu and Lu Hong were different. Sumu had a child. It was just like how she, when Yuan, was in the same situation back then. She kept complaining that she wanted to work. In the end, after she had little Yehue, she had to take care of her child, so she slowly lost interest in working. She was a woman and understood Sumu's difficulties, so she couldn't ask Sumu to go home and not work. But she didn't want Sumu to do dangerous work again. When Yuan's words were very euphemistic, but Sumu understood. After when Yuan left, she sat there alone in a daze. Her body was obviously exhausted, but she couldn't sleep. She was very tired. She was very tired. She was even more tired than when Cymbidium Chinense was by her side. Others might not be able to understand her feelings. Why did she cherish such an opportunity? Because she wanted to have the conditions to take Cymbidium Chinense to her side as soon as possible. Cymbidium Chinense was in the Yi family, and she couldn't see her whenever she wanted. After all, it was not her own home, so she had to be polite. No matter where she was, she knew the fickleness of human nature. No matter how good the Yi family was, she could not do whatever she wanted. Sumu sat quietly by herself. At 2:00 in the afternoon, she went to Cymbidium Chinense ward again. The nurse was watching. Yi Xiangnan was lying on the sofa, seemingly asleep, but when Sumu looked at him, he suddenly opened his eyes and stared at her. Sumu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She just stood far away. He sat up and said, "Forget it. I don't need you to watch over me now. You weren't here when I needed you. What's the point of watching over me now?" Sumu couldn't say a word. She didn't want to say anything. However, Yi Xiangnan seemed to have something to say to her. "I heard from my mother that you'll consider your job, right?" Sumu nodded and said, "Yes, I'll consider it." Yi Xiangnan didn't say anything more to her, nor did he sleep again. He just put his hands in front of him and stared at the direction of Cymbidium chinense quietly. Sumu took 3 days off to accompany Cymbidium chinense. During these 3 days, she almost took care of him personally. She wiped his body, fed him water, and then fed him. Cymbidium chinense was very obedient. Although he was uncomfortable, he was very happy. He hadn't been with his mother like this for a long time. Sumu felt a little sad, but she endured it. Yi Xiangnan spent half of the day in the company and the other half in the ward, but he almost spent the night in the ward. He was a good father. Sumu also felt quite surprised. 3 days later, Sumu had to go to work. Early in the morning, after taking care of Cymbidium chinense, she squatted in front of the bed, reached out and touched his little head. She said softly, "Baby, I have to go to work. I'll see you after work, okay?" Although Cymbidium chinense was a little disappointed, it was good to see his mother every day. Chapter 50-54. 1 second to remember, Sumu was the same. She even felt that Cymbidium chinense was in the hospital, so it was convenient for her to come over. There was some indescribable bitterness in her heart. She didn't know if she was wrong to leave this child in the Yi family. When she left, Yi Xiangnan just came back from outside with his mobile phone. It seemed that he went out to make a phone call. He stared at Sumu's tidy clothes and frowned. "Are you going out?" Sumu nodded. "Yes, I'm going to work." Yi Xiangnan closed the door of the ward, so that Cymbidium chinense wouldn't see their quarrel. "Sumu, what's in your mind?" "Cymbidium chinense is still in the hospital, and he will be discharged in a week. Is work really important to you?" Sumu looked up and stared at him. "Boss Yi, you probably don't know how difficult it is to survive, do you?" He sneered. "It's difficult to let go of your self-esteem, Sumu. Is it so difficult to accompany your son? Do you have a clear conscience to let go of him just because he is sensible?" Sumu looked down. "Yi Xiangnan, it's not as dark as you think. Cymbidium chinense can understand." "He can't understand. He just has to accept it." Yi Xiangnan swore. "You used to leave him alone at home because you didn't have the conditions. Now he is sick and you want to leave him in the hospital. Sumu, do you have any heart? How are you a mother?" Sumu was in a trance for a while. After a moment, she clenched her hands and her voice became softer. "It sounds that Boss Yi is a very good father." He narrowed his eyes. Sumu raised her head. "I have to go to the newspaper office. I still have something to do." "Boss Yi, not everyone can live as freely as the Yi family. Ordinary people are like this. If you don't like it, I won't let you see Cymbidium chinense. You want me to say this, right?" He suddenly said coldly. Sumu's face changed. Yi Xiangnan walked forward, and she could only step back. When he couldn't retreat any further, he pinched her chin with one hand and pushed her against the wall, murmuring in a low voice, "Sumu, Yeshuan needs a mother. Think about it carefully. If I remarry and bring Yeshuan over, he'll have a beautiful and gentle stepmother to take care of him when he's sick. How long will it take for him to forget you?" At that time, if you want to come and see him, will you still have to consider other women's feelings? You think it's not good to leave Yeshuan with my parents, but if I take care of him personally, I'll have to find a woman to take care of him. Cymbidium cymbi. He was really direct and cruel. It wasn't that Sumu had never felt powerless before, but now she felt that powerlessness again. She knew that Yi Xiannan could do this. He didn't need to put in much effort to do whatever he wanted. But Sumu was different. She had to think too much. Maybe it was just like what he said. Self-esteem was not valuable, but it was the only thing she had. She had no family, only Cymbidium chinense. If she lost her self-esteem, how could she love Cymbidium chinense? How could he watch his mother live under someone else's roof, not daring to say a word or refute? Sumu opened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her quietly. After a long time, she whispered, "I don't think you will be so cruel to Cymbidium chinense, will you?" Yi Xiangnan said coldly, "You really know me well. You use your son as a bargaining chip. Sumu, you are really good." She closed her eyes slightly, "No." Her voice was unprecedentedly fragile. Chapter 50-55. Sumu bit her lip and didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Xiannan stared at her for a while before saying indifferently, "You should go. Come and see him when you're free. He's quite pitiful. He didn't have a father before and now he doesn't have a mother." Sumu didn't know why, but this sentence made him sad. She pursed her lips. "I'll go first. Tell Cymbidium chinense later." He just stared at her and didn't say anything. Sumu left slowly. When she arrived at the news agency, she was still a little distracted. The people in the news agency were all pointing and gossiping. Dumeli must have found out something and spread the news. Everyone knew that Sumu's son was sick. Dumeli had no sympathy. As soon as Sumu went over, she said in a low voice in the pantry, "I don't know where some people get the confidence to think that they can stay in a rich family. Now, not only their ex-husband doesn't like them, even their mother-in-law doesn't like them. Which rich family can tolerate a woman running around outside? They don't even care about their children. I really don't know what they are doing." Dumeli then said, "Oh right, is it because Sumu can't hold on to CEO Ye's heart and that's why she has to work? If that's the case, she might even meet some mediocre men." Sumu walked over and splashed the water in her cup on Dumeli. It was so quiet in the news agency that even a pin drop could be heard. Dumeli was also stunned. After about half a minute, she came back to her senses and was about to scream and make a scene. At this moment, the chief editor came out and said coldly, "Dumeli, get in here." Dumeli was reluctant but she still glared at Sumu. If she could, she would kill Guanxi right now. Seeing that she didn't move, Zhang Fucai was furious. "Dumeli, get your ass in here." The news agency was silent. Everyone knew their relationship, but Zhang Fucai had always doted on Dumeli and had never shouted at her like this, let alone called himself your father. Dumeli's eyes were filled with anger, but at this time, she really didn't dare to argue with Zhang Fucai. She had followed him for a long time, and she could see that he was really angry. A smart woman needs to know that when a man is willing to indulge you, even if you poke a hole in the sky, he will still deal with you. But when he is impatient with you, you better not provoke him. Dumeli still wanted to stay in the news agency. If she wanted to stay, she would have to rely on Zhang Fucai. She entered the chief editor's office, softened a little, and said half coquettishly, "My clothes are all wet. Sumu is too arrogant. I don't know what she's relying on." "Relying on what?" Zhang Fucai sneered, relying on the fact that she gave birth to a dragon for the Yi family. How dare you make up stories in the newspaper office every day? Why don't you go to heaven? If it weren't for Su Mu, would Lu Hong have come back so easily? Think about it. Without Lu Hong, our publishing company will collapse. What will we eat then? Will we eat and drink the northwest wind? Du Mei was stunned. Isn't there still the entertainment section? I obviously do better than Lu Hong. Better my ass. The chief editor scolded, that's because I helped you. Du Mei, wake up. We are a newspaper office, not some small lousy magazine without mainstream influence. The things you wrote have already been destroyed by others. Why do you still write like this? Wake up. He was furious. Don't provoke Su Mu in the future. He said, then changed his words, no, you won't have a chance in the future. Du Mei's heart suddenly jumped. Chief editor. Chapter 50-56. Du Mei's heart skipped a beat. Chief, she rarely called him that. This time, she really panicked. Zhang Fucai waved his hand and said lightly, Mr. Yi has already told us that we can't use Su Mu anymore. Then, he was afraid that she would say something wrong, so he warned her, go out and keep your mouth shut. He was really afraid of her, so he waved his hand and asked her to get out. After receiving his advice, Du Mei felt happy and unhappy at the same time. It sounded like Su Mu had been suppressed, but it was obvious that the Yi family had not given up on this biological mother. So when she went out, she listened to Zhang Fucai's words and did not humiliate Su Mu again. Although she really wanted to. Su Mu got the news when she got off work. She was surprised but not surprised. Zhang Fucai was also very polite. He said a lot of polite words, such as coming to visit when there was a chance in the future, and he even sent her out in person, which gave her enough face. But face was the last thing Su Mu needed. Although the chief editor was very polite, she also knew that it was Yi Xiangnan's arrangement. He just asked her to go back to accompany Cymbidium Chinense. Su Mu didn't say anything. She just quietly packed up her things and was ready to leave. When it was time to get off work, no one moved. The whole society's new group was looking at Su Mu. Xiaowen was even more reluctant. She pulled Su Mu's sleeve and said, "Are you really going to leave? Aren't you doing a good job? Sister Hong said that you are very good. You are simply a born media person." Su Mu smiled bitterly. She didn't say anything. It was useless even if she did. She didn't know until today that the arm could not twist the thigh. When it was difficult for her to do things, Yi Xiangnan could make many people do things for him with a phone call, and he didn't need to pay any price. Power was indeed very charming. Su Mu looked down, packed up her things and hugged them. "Goodbye, everyone." Xiaowen pulled her back and whispered, "Su Mu, what are you going to do in the future?" Divorced and without a job, Su Mu was really pitiful. Su Mu shook her head. "At worst, I'll just sell shoes." Sister Hong walked out. Her eyes were slightly red. It was unknown whether it was due to lack of sleep or something else. She walked up to Su Mu and said softly, "Su Mu, I owe you one." "Don't say that, Sister Hong. It's what I should do." Su Mu didn't take it to heart. At that time, what had she been thinking? Yi Sun had a family by his side, so he might be disappointed in her and be sad. But Sister Hong was a woman. If she fell into someone else's hands, anything could happen. For her, the Cymbidium Chinense was the most important, but at that time, she had chosen to stay. Yi Xiangnan wouldn't understand these feelings. He was used to being superior, and she didn't expect him to understand. Su Mu looked at Sister Hong again and smiled. She didn't act pitiful and left in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Sister Hong stood there for a long time, and then without caring about her image, she lit a cigarette in front of everyone. Everyone knew that she was in a bad mood, so they didn't dare to say anything and quietly packed up and left. Zhang Fucai unexpectedly stayed. He approached her, took out a cigarette from her cigarette box, and lit it. Why didn't you ask Su Mu to stay? If you didn't fight for it, this girl would have saved you, wouldn't she? Editor-in-Chief Zhang didn't stay just because the Yi family was polite to Su Mu. He was also an old ginger. Su Mu's character was particularly good. There were very few people who could catch her eye, and Su Mu was one of them. Chapter 50-57. Memorize. There were very few people who could catch Lu Hong's eye, and Su Mu was one of them. Moreover, she had chosen to stay behind to look for Lu Hong because she saw her in a different light. However, he still had to obey Yi Xiangnan's call and order. The only thing he could do was to protect her last words, so he could only wrong his little baby. Zhang Fucai smoked his cigarette and looked at Sister Hong. Sister Hong didn't make a sound and continued to smoke. Only when dusk came through the window did she turn her head away. She didn't say anything and just gave Zhang Fucai a slap. That slap really used a lot of strength. Zhang Fucai was also a little stunned by the slap. He frowned and said, "It's not a good thing for a woman to be so fierce. Be careful that no one will marry you." Sister Hong went to her office to get something. Before she left, she turned around and said, "It's still better than marrying a scumbag." Zhang Fucai felt a little ashamed. He had let Lu Hong down, so he could not raise his head in front of her. However, if she wanted to leave, he would still follow. There was no one else in the elevator. The two of them stood ramrod straight. He tilted his head and asked, "Have you found anyone recently?" Sister Hong replied indifferently, "No." Zhang Fucai then asked a rather private question, "Then you usually, in a bar, you'll have men when you're drunk?" She glanced at him. "If not, it's the advertisers. You should know how those men are like. Your little darling has offered his services many times. Don't tell me you still care about it." Zhang Fucai naturally didn't care about Du Meili. What he cared about was Sister Hong. However, he couldn't say it out loud. Firstly, he felt sorry for her in the past. Secondly, he had a wife now. Even if he had this person in his heart, what could he do? He couldn't possibly not have a child. Besides, it was impossible for her to want him anymore. She had experienced many men, and he could only watch. He knew that whoever entered her house could not be him. Lu Hong hated him to the core, or maybe she did not hate or love him anymore, treating him like air and transparent. In just a short minute, Zhang Fucai felt quite sad. He went to the parking lot and said goodbye to Sister Hong. Sister Hong left in an ordinary car, but Zhang Fucai didn't leave immediately. He stood there and smoked for a while before driving home. After returning home, she was still the same. His wife, who was as beautiful as a flower and jade at home, was also a faded old woman after a few years. Just like Lu Hong in the past, he also despised her. But now he knew that when you married a woman, after a few years, especially after she gave birth to a child, if she didn't dress up, she would look the same. If you wanted her to be a flirtatious woman and take good care of your life and your child, that was just a dream, unless you hired a few servants and let her live the life of a rich wife. Therefore, although Zhang Fucai was now full of thoughts and often played tricks outside, he was satisfied with his current wife. She was very honest. She stayed at home to support her husband and children and never went out. Most of his salary was given to her. How should I put it? Without love, let's just live our lives. Only one person, or when he couldn't sleep at night, would recall the time when he fought with Sister Hong. At that time, he hadn't gained weight, and no one called him Uncle Fu. Sigh, Lu Hong was the person who had all of his youth. When Du Mei followed him, he already had the appearance of a rich and powerful man. He also knew why she followed him. Therefore, he often missed Sister Hong and the good times they had together. Chapter 50-58. Sister Hong drove away. When she reached a junction, she called Su Mu's number. Su Mu answered. Sister Hong's voice was indifferent. There's a KFC near the hospital. Wait for me there. I have something to tell you. Su Mu knew how to take the bus. She hadn't arrived yet, so she nodded. Okay. She and Sister Hong arrived at almost the same time. When Lu Hong came over, she ordered a cup of coffee for her. I know you're not used to it. Warm your hands, Su Mu said softly. Sister Hong let out a long sigh and looked at Su Mu. How is it? What's your plan for the future? Su Mu shook her head and smiled bitterly. I don't have any plans yet. Sister Hong knew her very well. You're not going back to sell shoes, are you? Su Mu, don't tell me that you're so promising. Su Mu looked at her and said after a long time, Sister Hong, you're right. I'm really going back to sell shoes. Promising. Sister Hong snorted and then took out a card from her bag. There's 200,000 yuan in it. It's your commission. The password is 123123. Su Mu was stunned. Sister Hong. How clean do you think people in our line of work are? If there's no profit, do you think I'll work hard and accompany those old foxes who can be my father to drink and be taken advantage of? Sister Hong said indifferently, Su Mu, it's a good thing to leave the news agency. In fact, it's not a clean place. In this world, where is clean? She lowered her head and took a sip of coffee. Then she looked up and said, it's quite bad. Su Mu didn't say a word. Sister Hong continued, apart from being raised well like the wives of rich families, they don't need to face those things. Or they can marry an ordinary man and be a faded old woman at home. Their husband may be playing around outside. Sister Hong flipped her hair and smiled bitterly. Who knows? Su Mu could understand her feelings, so she didn't say anything. Sister Hong smiled. Don't think that I'm sad. I've already accepted it. Su Mu, what I want to say is, go your own way, but don't be too stubborn. Remember what I said. Don't hit your head easily. Su Mu nodded. She still didn't want the money, but Sister Hong insisted, you've gone through fire and water with me. You should take the money. I'm moral. Take the money and you don't need to find a job in a hurry. You can take a rest first, or you can find a decent job to enrich yourself. Sister Hong held Su Mu's hand. I know that you are afraid that others will look down upon you. You. Don't worry. Su Mu was quite touched. Sister Hong, this doesn't sound like what you would say. How is that different? I have to keep moving forward every day. Everyone needs to rest. If it wasn't for Yi Sun's illness, would have taken you out to relax. Sister Hong was a free and easy person. She owed Su Mu a favor, but she wouldn't mention it all the time. That way, Su Mu would feel burdened. Sister Hong heaved a sigh of relief. Now that the business is done, it's time for you to see the child. Buy some food for the child and call me if there's anything. Su Mu got up and walked outside with her. Sister Hong smiled and patted her on the shoulder again. I know you won't be able to do it for long. It's too hard to follow me. You can't take care of the child. Stay and be city and think about what Sister Hong said. Sumu nodded. I know. Sister Hong got into the car and said goodbye to her before driving away. Chapter 50-59. Sumu stood there for a long time before she went to the hospital. Cymbidium chinense was awake. Yi Xiangnan leaned against the side of the bed, holding a fairy tale book in his hand and reading it to Cymbidium chinense. His voice was very pleasant and relaxed. His clothes were also very relaxed. He wore casual pants and a thin sweater, which was a little different from his usual well-dressed appearance. Cymbidium chinense listened very carefully, and his little face was full of seriousness. This scene was a little touching. Sumu walked over and put down the things in her hands. Has Cymbidium chinense had dinner? Cymbidium chinense tilted his little head and found that Sumu had come over. He was very happy. Mommy. Sumu squatted in front of him. You look much better. Saying that, she kissed the little guy's face. Cymbidium chinense's little face suddenly turned red, and he was a little embarrassed. Sumu touched his head. Mommy will make small wontons for you, okay? It's your favorite. Cymbidium chinense was very happy, but he couldn't do anything, so he could only grin. Sumu looked at his silly look and also smiled. She said very softly, Mommy will go to the kitchen. This VIP ward had a small living room and kitchen. It was very clean and tidy. As Sumu said that, she took off her coat and carefully placed it on the sofa. Then, she picked up the things and went to the kitchen. From the beginning to the end, she was very gentle to Cymbidium chinense. She didn't even look at Yi Xiangnan. He thought that she knew something and didn't want to quarrel in front of Cymbidium chinense since she didn't have to go to work tomorrow. When Sumu was making small wontons, Yi Xiangnan talked to Cymbidium chinense and coaxed him before going to the kitchen. Closing the door, he leaned against the door and looked at Sumu. She was quite skinny. From the back, she looked unbelievably slender. He had carried her before, and she was as light as a feather. Yi Xiangnan curled his lips and crossed his arms in front of him. Why are you unhappy? The bottom of society has no right to be unhappy. As long as CEO Yi is happy. Sumu's voice was slightly cold. He walked over and rested his chin on her shoulder, murmuring, You're not happy. How can I be happy? Sumu didn't move for a long time. She knew in her heart that he was teasing her. It was like a superior teasing a bug, watching her fall into his net, and then he could freely enjoy her struggle and even her pain. To put it bluntly, it was a rich man's game. He can flirt with you as he pleases. It's best if you don't fall for him. If you fall for him, then sorry, no one will take responsibility for you. She knew Yi Xiangnan's tricks very well. In the past, he wanted her to be his nanny, and now he was playing this kind of prank. He must hate her a lot. CEO Yi has a lot of time to play this kind of game, but I don't. She said in a low voice, Let go of me, I want to make food for the child. Cymbidium chinense is hungry. But that scoundrel still put his face on her shoulder. I'm hungry too. Sumu was even more sure of his evil intentions. She wanted to break free from him, but he said, Do you want Cymbidium chinense to come out of bed and see if mom and dad are quarreling again? Sumu couldn't stand it anymore. She let out a long sigh and said, What do you want, Yi Xiangnan? I don't have a job anymore. I'm staying here to take care of Cymbidium chinense. So, you can go to the company or play around. Don't play tricks on me here. It's very boring, you know. She pushed him away and he took a few steps back. His face was still full of mockery. Not bad, you've improved. Chapter 50-60. He leaned to the side again and resumed the appearance of a rich young master. Why, did Lu Hong give you money? So you're not worried about losing your job, right? Su Mu couldn't stand him. She bit her lip and said, I don't know what you're talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Yi Xiangnan stared at her eyes. Su Mu, is your son only worth 200,000? Su Mu was really shocked. She didn't expect Yi Xiangnan to even know this. She didn't say anything, but it didn't mean that he was willing to let her go. Yi Xiannan chuckled softly. Of course you can feel at ease. Su Mu couldn't stand it anymore. She put down everything in her hands. Then she tilted her head and looked at him silently. She said softly, Yi Xiangnan, CEO Yi, what do you want? Her lips were trembling slightly. It doesn't matter if I lose my job. I can go sell shoes, but you're right. I'm a shoe seller, so I don't deserve to have dreams, friends, or loyalty. Everything I've done is wrong. Doing something wrong is a sin. And you, all the mistakes made by people who are nobler than me, are not worth mentioning. They can be easily erased, right? She was a little emotional. Am I wrong, Yi Xiangnan? He didn't say anything and just looked at her quietly. Su Mu smiled and said, we're from two different worlds. We have our own standards. He finally spoke in a low and slow voice, do you still love Shen Wenquan? Su Mu's pupils dilated, and she stared at him for a long time. In the end, she didn't answer his question. She didn't know why, but she just didn't say it. Yi Xiannan chuckled lightly, as if she didn't care. He leaned against the door and looked at her as she thought he would. He thought it would be fun to watch her struggle like she was a bug. Su Mu pursed her lips again and didn't say a word. She just quietly began to make small wontons again. After wrapping it up for a while, she couldn't wrap it up anymore. She had never lost control like this before. She squatted in the corner and buried her face in her knees. When Su Mu cried, there was no sound at all. Even Yi Xiangnan did not know whether she was crying or not. However, she continued to bury her face, unwilling to cry out loud. Yi Xiangnan still walked over and said in a hoarse voice, Su Mu, get up. She didn't move, so he reached out to pull her. However, she was so skinny, and he didn't know where she got the strength from, but he just couldn't pull her. Su Mu still buried her face and refused to say a word. Yi Xiangnan let out a long breath. Su Mu, do you want Cymbidium Chinense to see you like this? He can't get out of bed yet. Do you want him to hear and worry? Su Mu still buried her head, and Yi Xiangnan stood up and looked at her. After a long time, she finally straightened her body and didn't say a word. She just lowered her eyes. Yi Xiangnan looked at her. Su Mu's voice was quite indifferent. You go out. I'll make something for Cymbidium Chinense to eat. She wiped away her tears as if the weakness and loss of control just now had never happened. Yi Xiangnan wanted to say something, but in the end, he gave up. He walked outside. Cymbidium Chinense was lying on its side. Its little face was pale, and its eyes were staring in their direction. This child still heard it. Yi Xiangnan walked over and gently touched its little head. Daddy and Mommy just quarreled a little. It's nothing. Cymbidium Chinense lowered its little head and didn't say a word. It looked quite dejected. Chapter 50-61. Yi Xiangnan patted his little head again and smiled warmly. All right, just wait for a while. Breakfast will be ready. Xiangnan nodded and waited obediently, but there was still a hint of uneasiness in his eyes. Yi Xiangnan reached out and patted his little head, comforting him silently. After about 10 minutes, Sumu was done and brought a small bowl over. She sat on the chair and fed Cymbidium chinense carefully. She was very thin, but she did things very carefully when she was with her son. Cymbidium chinense ate with relish and was a little careful, as if he was afraid that Sumu would say that she would leave at any time. Sumu's heart ached and she said softly, "Mommy won't leave. Mommy will always be with you, okay?" Cymbidium chinense's eyes were watery. He didn't say anything and continued to eat. Cymbidium chinense had to grow up quickly and be with Mommy when he grew up. Seeing that her son was so sensible, Sumu felt sad. Actually, Yi Xiangnan was right. Other than her damn pride, Sumu had nothing left. Even now, when she wanted to hug Cymbidium chinense, she had to worry about Yi Xiangnan. Sumu really wanted to cry out loud when there was no one else around. When there was no one around, she still had to hold on in front of her child. She had held on for so many years. This time, she could definitely do it. This matter also told her that Yi Xiangnan had always been standing on the high ground, and she had no right to speak at all. Just as Sumu was feeding Cymbidium chinense, Yi Xiangnan had been watching her quietly. He was a businessman, and a very smart one at that. He knew what Sumu was thinking at that moment. However, he didn't care too much. There was still time. His son was also in his hands. As for whether Su was Sumu's or not, he no longer cared. After the Cymbidium chinense surgery, she was still very weak and wanted to sleep after a while. Before going to bed, he leaned against his mother and asked in a low voice, "Mom, when can we be together?" Sumu saw that his little eyelids were about to close, but he was still stubbornly holding himself up. She felt a burst of sadness in her heart. She reached out and touched her son's hair, "Very soon." Cymbidium chinense opened in a daze. "Mom, what time is very soon?" He was in a daze. "I miss Mom." Seeing that he was about to fall asleep, Sumu reached out and stroked his hair, coaxing him to sleep. Cymbidium chinense closed its eyes for a while, and then opened them worriedly, staring at Sumu. Sumu smiled slightly, "Mom won't leave. Mom will stay here with Cymbidium chinense." Only then did the little guy feel relieved and close his eyes. His thin eyelids were crystal clear, which was very beautiful. He really inherited the good genes of the Yi family. Sometimes, Sumu couldn't take her eyes off this beautiful little guy. She gently looked at her little lover, her eyes filled with tender affection. Cymbidium chinense was very obedient and fell asleep after a while. He recovered well after the surgery. Fortunately, Yi Xiangnan almost didn't go to the company to stay with him. When Cymbidium chinense was completely asleep, Sumu seemed to have completely calmed down. She turned her head to look at Yi Xiangnan and said in a low voice, "Let's talk." Yi Xiangnan stared at her for a long time before saying, "What do you want to talk about?" Sumu looked up, and her eyes were a little absent-minded. "I want to take care of Cymbidium chinense for a period of time." He was still staring at her. "How long is a period of time?" "Until Cymbidium chinense goes to school." Sumu gently pressed her lower lip. Yi Xiangnan lowered his eyes. "You let Cymbidium chinense live with you?" Chapter 5062. Yi Xiangnan looked down. "You'll let Cymbidium chinense stay at your place?" Sumu was embarrassed when he said that. That damned pride of his had resurfaced. Yi Xiangnan smiled. I can give you the villa. I'll stay in the hotel. If Sumu refused, it would be unreasonable. Cymbidium Chinense was different now. It was not good for him to stay at her place. Besides, it was not good for her to drive Yi Xiangnan out. She thought for a long time and whispered, I can take care of him during the day. I'll leave when you come back at night. What if I have a social engagement or a nightlife? He said bluntly. Sumu pursed her lips. Cymbidium Chinense is sick. You can bear it. I can't bear it. Single men are lonely. I'll feel sorry for myself if I don't go out for a drink. Besides, there's a nanny at home to take care of the child, isn't there? He chuckled. Sumu was speechless. Yi Xiangnan was used to being mean, so she didn't take it to heart. She went ahead and ate all the wontons she made, really treating her as an old maid. Sumu didn't say anything. She ate some and accompanied Cymbidium Chinense. At about 8:00 in the evening, Secretary Li came over with some documents. When he saw Sumu, he winked secretly. Sumu felt helpless, but she didn't say anything. Secretary Li put down the documents and left. Yi Xiangnan sat on the sofa to deal with his work, and Sumu accompanied Cymbidium Chinense. At 11 or 12:00 in the evening, Yi Xiangnan suddenly said, If you're sleepy, you can sleep for a while. There's a bed inside. Sumu wanted to ask him where he slept, but she swallowed the words. Yi Xiangnan seemed to know what she was going to ask and said lightly, I sleep on the sofa. Seeing that Sumu didn't respond, he looked up and said with a smile that wasn't a smile, Don't worry, I'm not interested in you. There are so many women out there, I won't hang myself on one tree. Sumu didn't say anything. She just helped Cymbidium Chinense wipe its body. Then, she went to wash her face and went to sleep. The small room was connected to the ward outside, probably for the convenience of taking care of the patients, and there was no door. Sumu only took off her jacket and lay down. She lay there for a long time and felt a little insomnia. She tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. In the end, she had no other choice. She sat up and saw Yi Xiangnan from this angle. He had already fallen asleep and was lying on the sofa. Under the dim light, she could only see his outline. Sumu pursed her lips and walked out to check on Cymbidium Chinense. Cymbidium Chinense was sleeping soundly. She looked at him silently for a while before covering him with the blanket. When she returned to the small room, she walked past the sofa and quickened her pace. However, her subtle movements still woke Yi Xiangnan up. Her wrist was silently grabbed. Strong and unreasonable. That strength that was holding her wrist was painful. Sumu whispered, Let go of me. Yi Xiangnan was also a little surprised. Sumu's wrist was really thin, so thin that it seemed like it was made of bones. He frowned and said after a long time, What are you hiding for? As he said that, he reached out and pulled Sumu down beside him. She wanted to get up, but he held her down in the dark. After a while, his mocking voice rang out, This is a ward. What are you thinking, Sumu? He paused and said in a mean tone, You're really thin. Sumu was a little embarrassed and said in a low voice, Is it fun to humiliate me like this? Yi Xiangnan twitched his lips, It's okay, I think it's fun. Chapter 50-63. Sumu felt that he was boring, so she took his hand away, but he caught her back. Without saying a word, he held her hand. You are really stubborn. He had never seen such a stubborn person. Usually, when women saw him, they would flatter him, but not like Sumu. He was willing to stop looking for women outside, but she still asked so much. He got angry when he thought about it. He felt that it was meaningless, and the slight waves just now disappeared at once. He glanced at her a little harshly. She was really thin, and there was no meat on her body. He let go of her, lay down by himself, and didn't talk to her anymore. Sumu pursed her lips, said nothing, and went back to her room. In this way, they got along in the ward for a few days. Most of the time, Yi Xiangnan went to the company, and he would come to stay with her at night. During this period of time, with his parents accompanying him, Cymbidium Chinense's little face had more smiles. The more she looked at this smile, the more Sumu felt that she was a little sorry for her son. She tried to stay with Cymbidium Chinense as much as possible, thinking of ways to make him happy. After a long time, Sumu regretted it. If she could start over, she might try everything to keep Cymbidium Chinense by her side, and he might not be happy in the Yi family. Thinking about it, she put her forehead against Cymbidium Chinense, and her nose was sour, and she couldn't express her sadness. Cymbidium Chinense also felt his mother's mood, and didn't dare to say anything, just sticking to his mother obediently. After a long time, he whispered, "Mom, don't cry." Sumu shook her head. "I'm not crying, I'm not going to cry." She held Cymbidium Chinense's little face. "Mom, work hard, and take Cymbidium Chinense home in the future, okay?" When Yi Xiangnan came back from outside, he happened to hear this sentence. He gently closed the door, took off his coat and threw it on the sofa. He sat down and looked at Sumu. "Where are you going to pick up Cymbidium Chinense?" "Your house." He snorted lightly. Sumu knew that his inexplicable sense of superiority was coming back again. She didn't want to bother with him. She just bit her lip and let out a long sigh. Yi Xiangnan chuckled. "I think it's better to be realistic. Beg me, maybe I can let you stay in my house forever." At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something and suddenly pulled Sumu to his side. His voice was so low that only Sumu could hear him. "Don't have any ideas about me." "I don't have any ideas." These words were really cold and elegant. Sumu was so angry that she almost laughed. She glared at him. "Don't worry, Boss Yi. I don't have any idea." "That's good." His eyes were burning. "I can arrange for you to work, and I can also arrange for you to take care of Cymbidium Chinense. Think about it." He added, "You can sleep in the guest room." "For the sake of Cymbidium Chinense, I won't bring a woman back." Sumu felt cold and said, "Do I have to thank you?" "You don't have to thank me." "For Cymbidium Chinense." He let go of her and said lightly, "Think about it." However, Sumu was not willing to think about it. She didn't say anything, which could be regarded as a silent refusal. Yi Xiangnan didn't force her. Everyone had their own aspirations. He went to accompany Cymbidium Chinense. The little Cymbidium Chinense just listened to them. It seemed that he heard his father say that he wanted his mother to take care of him. He was still a little eager, but he was afraid that his mother would feel wronged. Little Cymbidium Chinense was really a little warm man. He wanted to ask, but he swallowed it in the end. When he was discharged from the hospital, Sumu helped him pack up his things. Cymbidium Chinense whispered to Yi Xiangnan, "Dad, will Mom go back with us?" Chapter 50-64. Yi Xiangnan's eyes fell on the woman beside him. He paused for a moment and said, "You have to ask Mom." Cymbidium Chinense saw that Sumu didn't pay attention to him, so he asked in a low voice, "Dad, are you and Mom divorced or never married?" Yi Xiangnan helped his son tidy up his clothes and carried him to the sofa to sit down. He thought for a moment, is there a difference? Cymbidium chinense said, there is a difference. Divorced means that you don't love each other anymore. Never married means that mom and dad didn't love each other. Yi Xiangnan squatted down and looked at his son. Tell dad, who told you this? Xiaomei. Cymbidium chinense stammered, Xiaomei knows a lot. Her father and mother divorced. She said that they didn't love each other anymore. People who don't love each other can't live together. Cymbidium chinense said and looked at Yi Xiangnan eagerly. Yi Xiangnan smiled and held his son's little face with his big palm. Do you want to ask if dad loves mom or if mom loves dad? Both. Cymbidium chinense said honestly. CEO Yi patted his son's little face. Ask your mom. If your mom is willing to love me, I will love her. This was like kicking the ball to Sumu. Sumu was speechless when she heard this, but she didn't say anything. She packed up her things and left in a car alone when the servants came to get them. Yi Xiangnan carried Cymbidium chinense and walked a few steps. Cymbidium chinense looked at Sumu eagerly. Sumu stood there without moving. Yi Xiangnan turned his head and said, didn't you say that you will take care of Cymbidium chinense during the day? Did you forget? Only then did Sumu follow. Yi Xiangnan drove the car himself. He carefully placed the Cymbidium chinense on the back seat and let Sumu carry him. When he fastened the seatbelt, he snorted coldly. Put away your pride. You want me to carry the Cymbidium chinense while driving? When Yuan and Yi Mubai didn't come today in order to let the three of them be alone. When Sumu heard this, she couldn't refute it at all. She just sat silently in the back seat and didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan was also bored and started the car. After driving for half an hour, they arrived at the villa where he lived. Cymbidium chinense had also stayed in the hospital for half a month. He was very happy to be back here. He sat on the sofa and read his favorite comic book with Sumu accompanying him. Yi Xiangnan took off his coat and answered a call. It was from Wen Yuan. Mom. Yes, I'm home. Cymbidium chinense is very good. As he said this, his eyes fell on Sumu and his voice slightly sank. Yes, she's here. She won't be working recently. She'll be taking care of Cymbidium chinense. On the other side of the phone, Wen Yuan already knew. He said helplessly, Xiangnan, no matter how dissatisfied you are, you can't mess up Sumu's work. Yi Xiangnan's tone was indifferent. Mom, don't think too much. It's settled. If there's a job, I'll find her another one in the future. When Yuan said a few more words, most likely telling him not to mess around. Yi Xiangnan said indifferently that he got it and then hung up. He looked at Sumu. Think about my suggestion. There's also a TV station under Stars Entertainment. There's a lot of traffic. Aren't you studying media? You can be an anchor or something. As he said this, he frowned again. But you need to fix your image. Otherwise, people will think that you're an African refugee. Sumu pursed her lips. Yi Xiangnan, do you have to be so mean? He snorted softly and glanced at her. Then, he didn't say anything else. Chapter 50-65. Yi Xiangnan looked at his son and let go of Sumu. He sat beside Cymbidium chinense and pulled Cymbidium chinense's hair. Don't sit all the time after the operation. Lie down after half an hour and let your mother watch you. Cymbidium chinense nodded obediently and looked at his mother secretly. Sumu also looked at him secretly and Yi Xiangnan snorted. A loving mother will spoil her son. He still had to go to the company. He just sat for a while and then left. Before leaving, he gave some instructions to his family. The aunties at home were also smart. He was afraid that Sumu couldn't be suppressed here. It didn't matter if she felt wronged. The most important thing was that he didn't want his son to see his mother being bullied by the servants. After giving instructions to his family, he went to the company. In the early morning, Secretary Lee found that CEO Yi was in a good mood. She was surprised. Previously, when CEO Ye's son was sick, CEO Ye's face was ugly and his mood was about to explode. But now, it was completely different. During the meeting, he would sometimes smile. CEO Yi looked so good when he smiled. Even those who were used to seeing stars couldn't help but look at CEO Yi. But it made sense. CEO Yi had good genes. His father was the best actor in the past. He was the white moon in many girls' hearts. Lin Lu also attended this meeting. After a period of time, she almost gave up on Yi Xiangnan. No matter how good-looking CEO Yi was, she didn't dare to look at him. She also knew that Su Mu and Yi Xiangnan didn't get along well. But it didn't mean that other women would have a chance. On the contrary, they would be affected. Thinking about the family dinner she attended last time, she was really miserably bullied. She didn't know how she had offended CEO Yi. At this point, she finally believed that Yi Xiangnan had never treated her as a woman. At most, she was a female. Lin Lu's current thoughts were very simple. It was her career. She didn't know who said that a woman could live without love, but she couldn't live without a career. Love without bread was illusory. She was very clear that she had the ability to stand firm in Starlight Entertainment. The only thing he could do was to keep his distance from Boss Yi. It was not that he was afraid of that woman, but CEO Ye's meaning was very obvious. He didn't want to continue with her anymore. Lin Lu was ambitious and tactful. When she received the check, she understood everything. In the future, she would return to her own path. But now, seeing him smile, she still felt a little uncomfortable. She didn't know if CEO Yi was in a good mood because of Sumu, because she heard from Secretary Xiao that Sumu had been in the hospital these days and CEO Yi had been spending the night there. This was highly likely to happen. Lin Lu smiled bitterly and hid her thoughts. After the meeting, Yi Xiangnan walked out of the conference room with a document in his hand. Secretary Li smiled at the higher-ups and immediately followed him out. The higher-ups stretched their bodies. Did you hear? Miss Su is back. She should be at CEO Ye's home now. CEO Ye's mood is not the same. The others were also criticizing in their hearts, CEO Yi seems to care about Miss Su. Someone laughed. He cares about that child. How can he be so young without a mother to take care of him? He fell sick because there was no one to take care of him. As a mother, she is really ruthless. She is actually willing to abandon her child. Do you think there's something wrong with the nightclub? Otherwise, why would Miss Su refuse to be a proper husband and wife when he is rich and good-looking? What's wrong with him? Where's his son? Someone snorted lightly. Chapter 50-66. That person nodded, that's true. Yi Xiangnan was in a good mood. In fact, he was worried about Cymbidium chinense illness. Sumu did take good care of this child, he thought. Sitting in the luxurious office, he twirled a golden pen and said thoughtfully, Secretary Lee, help me check if there is any vacant host in Phoenix Satellite TV. It's best if it's reporting on current affairs. He thought of Sumu's image. An entertainment host didn't suit her either. Secretary Lee understood that it was a program prepared for Mrs. Yi. She checked and said with a smile, CEO Yi, I found it. There is a good program. The female host of today's program is about to get married. She should be pregnant soon. This program suits Miss Sue's temperament and is good for her future development. Especially, it was comfortable and good for taking care of children. She worked from 9 to 5 and had plenty of time. It was the most suitable job for rich ladies to kill time. After Secretary Li finished, Yi Xiangnan glanced at her and said lightly, Who said it's her? Secretary Li then asked, If it's not Miss Sue, then who is it? CEO Yi said it's easy for me to arrange. As a result, her boss gave her a big supercilious look and lowered his voice, Put it aside for now. Secretary Li held back her laughter. She knew very well that Miss Sue hadn't agreed yet. CEO Yi was hot-headed. But as a secretary, she didn't say it out loud. Secretary Li quickly arranged things and the position was empty. The station didn't need to arrange for people to go there anymore. After the phone call, she reported to Yi Xiangnan again. Secretary Li deserved to be a confidant. Her work attitude was satisfactory. So when CEO Yi was in a bad mood, Secretary Li was rarely scolded. She knew how to adapt to circumstances. After dealing with this matter, Secretary Li went out. In short, CEO Yi was in a good mood for the whole day. When CEO Yi got off work, he was in a better mood. He even smiled when he came down from the CEO's exclusive elevator. It shocked the onlookers. Yi Xiangnan didn't mind. He got into his car and drove straight home. During this time, he had also pushed off a date. It was from Qin Xian. Qin Xian was going to get married. He was probably afraid of marriage. As CEO Yi drove, he heard Qin Xian complaining about how he got pregnant. Didn't you say in front of the elders that you would marry Bai Anan if she got pregnant? Why are you regretting it now? Yi Xiangnan smiled. Qin Xian complained, I'm not regretting it, I'm not mentally prepared. She said she took medicine, and I believe that she really did. Give birth to a child if you have one. You two are a good match. Bai Anan is so beautiful. What are you dissatisfied with? She also knows how to make money. Yi Xiangnan snorted. Bai Anan had grown up with his cousin. Qin Xian complained that he had found the wrong person. Qin Xian hung up the phone. He was quite depressed. It was difficult to find someone to drink with. Shenting accompanied Qin Yihuan all day long. He was a good man. He had to ask for permission even if he wanted to smoke, let alone have a drink. Really, how did Shenting manage to put on an act in the past when he was so cold? Thinking about it, Qin Xian still couldn't believe it. Qin Xian put down the phone and looked at Shenting with mixed feelings. Bai Anan used to like Shenting, but he didn't know if she still liked him now. Chapter 50-67. Updated quickly, what he could be sure of was that Shenting had always liked Yihuan. In the Qin family's mansion, Shenting was feeding Yihuan fruits. The pregnant woman was leaning on his shoulder, watching TV and enjoying her husband's service. Qin Xian couldn't stand it anymore, so he took his coat and was about to go out. Shenting stopped him. Where are you going? Qin Xian said helplessly, to see Bai Anan. Shenting didn't say anything else. After Qin Xian left, he continued to take care of his pregnant wife. Yi Huan lay on his shoulder. Why do you think they? Shenting's gaze fell on her face and he smiled. Actually, I'm also curious. Why did you climb over to my place when you were so young? Qin Yi Huan looked at him and said, Can you not mention the past? Shinting smiled and suddenly said, Yi Huan, actually, I was the most unsure if I should give up at that time. I saw that you and Yi Xiangnan were so close, then why didn't you give up? She reached out and pinched his handsome face. She probably found it very interesting. Shinting was usually a little strict in the company, but now he was very gentle at home. Shinting grabbed her hand and gave his wife a warning look. Qin Yi Huan didn't dare to do anything else. She nestled beside him and said, Shinting, you haven't answered me yet. Shinting lowered his head and touched her long black hair. His voice suddenly became a little dangerous. Do you really want to know? She nodded, so Shinting lowered his head and whispered a few words in her ear. Then, Qin Yi Huan's face turned red. She bit her lips so hard that it almost bled. She said shyly, Shinting, you're so shameless. I was only 18 years old at that time. Shinting smiled. As a man, of course he would have some bold ideas. However, as a mature man, these dark thoughts were only kept in his heart. What he could tell her was not dark. But she couldn't take it anymore. Shinting smiled and didn't say anything else. He just quietly accompanied his little wife. He felt that he was very lucky to be slow. How many people could accompany the girl they wanted to grow up together, watch her grow up little by little, and then become his woman? His child was still in her belly. Shinting whispered a few words into her ear. Qin Yi Huan was a little surprised, but she didn't say anything else. She just stayed with him. Time passed so peacefully that she almost forgot how she liked Yi Xiangnan when she was young. She had liked Yi Xiangnan, but when another person forcefully interfered and quietly replaced Yi Xiangnan bit by bit, she was 18 years old at that time. She thought that if she could do that at that time, the person she liked must have been Shinting. Until now, she still couldn't believe that she had done such a willful thing. Yi Huan covered her face as she thought about it. Shinting lowered his head and looked at his wife. Then he laughed and said, Mrs. Shin, you're not young anymore. Are you sure you still want to act like a spoiled child? But she didn't care. She just wanted to act like a spoiled child. In the end, Shinting coaxed her for a long time. Their relationship was good. That was probably how it was. Others couldn't even be envious. Qin Xian was fine. He was going to be a father soon. Although he was panicking, he was like the Calabash brothers. They gave birth one after another, 2 in 3 years. Chapter 50-68. The most unhappy one was probably President Yi. When he drove back to the villa, it was already dark. He sat in the car and looked at the light coming from the villa. He didn't get out of the car immediately. Instead, he sat in the car and smoked, looking at the villa while smoking. In the villa, there were women and children he had held. But it was not a home. Yi Xiangnan narrowed his eyes and finished the cigarette in his hand. He opened the door and got out of the car. When he got out of the car, he saw Sumu coming out of the villa. She had already put on her coat and scarf. He leaned against the car door. You're going back? Sumu nodded. Yes, I'm going back. She was polite and didn't seem to dislike him, but President Yi felt that his good mood for the day had been ruined by her. He poked his head out and saw Cymbidium chinense sitting on the sofa with a disappointed face. He must be reluctant to let Sumu go. He was also very dissatisfied with Sumu in his heart. What did this woman need her self-esteem for? Could it be used as food? He reached out and grabbed her arm. Leave after eating. You left as soon as I came back as if I was going to eat you. Or are you a servant at home? Are you off work at this time? Sumu couldn't beat him in an argument. She pursed her lips and didn't say anything in the end. Yi Xiangnan took her back, which was more or less domineering. He also knew that Sumu didn't dare to have a head-on conflict with him in front of Cymbidium Chinense, for fear that the child would be hurt. After discovering this, he tried his best to be pretentious. Not only did he have dinner, but he also asked her to put Cymbidium Chinense to sleep. But it was only 7:00 after dinner, and Cymbidium Chinense slept at 9:00 now. It was too late for her to go back at 9:00, so Sumu helped put Cymbidium Chinense into the warm quilt and planned to tell Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan was in his study, puffing out clouds of smoke. His two slender and powerful legs were directly placed on the office desk, his body leaning against the back of the chair. He was smoking a cigarette between his good-looking fingers and scrolling through the news on his phone with the other hand. Hearing the footsteps, he thought it was a servant, so he said calmly, "How is the Cymbidium Chinense? Is Miss Su accompanying him?" Sumu didn't say anything. When he looked up, he found that it was her, so he put his leg down and frowned slightly. "Why are you here?" Sumu pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "It's getting late. I want to go back early." Yi Xiangnan continued to smoke. After a few puffs, he nodded in understanding. "That's true. There won't be any more cars later." This was the most considerate Sumu had ever seen Yi Xiangnan. In fact, he was quite nice when he was easy to talk to. After all, he looked like a dog. However, Yi Xiangnan soon broke her thoughts. He said matter-of-factly, "Anyway, you don't have to work. There are many guest rooms here. Just pick one." Sumu bit her lower lip. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Yi. I appreciate it, but I think it's better for me to go home first." Yi Xiangnan frowned. "Sumu, are you trying to avoid arousing suspicion?" He came out from behind and walked to her. He seemed to be holding something in his hand. When he was in front of her, he lowered his head and said, "Sumu, there's no point in avoiding arousing suspicion now. Shen Wenxuan and Yi Hui have a child and will get married soon." Then he said with a faint smile, "Shen Wenxuan is a very smart person. I believe that he and Yi Hui will be happy." As he said that, he moved closer and said in a very low voice, "Don't talk to me about love. As long as they like each other, life will not be difficult. Look, he is very smart. But you? What can you get in the end if you are so stubborn? Sumu, the world is not what you think. You can't get anything by persevering." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.